The rhythmic thumping of Black Hawk helicopter rotors shattered the serene quiet of Liberty Crest University's manicured campus, sending shockwaves through the gathered crowd of stunned students. As dust swirled across the immaculate quad, a young woman in a simple, worn hoodie, the same woman they had mocked and dismissed for days, strode purposefully toward the military aircraft bearing the name Valkyrie emblazoned on its side. In that moment of collective realization, the privileged children of America's elite finally understood the woman they had deemed unworthy was the very hero their nation needed in its darkest hour. This is a story of courage buried beneath judgment of military legacy, forgotten, and of what happens when we mistake appearance for worth. Share in the comments a time when you misjudged someone and join us for this incredible journey. Dawn painted the rugged mountains in shades of blood and rust. As Captain Morgan Riley adjusted her night vision goggles and gripped the controls of her Black Hawk helicopter, the air inside the cockpit felt electrically charged with tension, the only sounds the steady whir of rotors and the controlled breathing of her crew. Valkyrie 1-6, this is command. You are cleared, hot for extraction. 3 minutes to target. Hostiles confirmed in the area. Morgan's voice was steel wrapped in velvet as she responded. Roger that command. Valkyrie 1-6, proceeding to target. The mission was simple on paper. Extract a high-value intelligence officer and his team from a compromised position deep in hostile territory. A routine operation for the military's most elite helicopter pilot and her hand-picked crew. But Captain Morgan Riley, call sign Valkyrie, had learned through 3 combat tours that nothing in Afghanistan was ever routine.
2 minutes to target. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant David Hayes, announced, his voice steady despite the danger ahead.
He tapped the St. Christopher medal that hung beside his instrument panel, the same one that had accompanied him through 2 tours in Iraq before Afghanistan. Morgan guided the Black Hawk lower the aircraft, responding to her touch with the intimacy of long partnership. Behind her, Master Sergeant Chris Ramirez and Staff Sergeant Michael Chen prepared for rapid deployment, checking their weapons with practiced efficiency. 1 minute, Hayes called out. The extraction site came into view, a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings. Perfect for an ambush. Morgan's instincts, honed by hundreds of combat missions, screamed danger. Something's not right, she said, her eyes scanning the terrain. Command, this is Valkyrie 1-6. No visual on friendly forces at extraction point. The radio crackled with static before the response came through. Valkyrie 1-6 friendlies are marking position now. Proceed as planned. A small light flashed from the clearing, the signal. Morgan began her descent, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. As the helicopter hovered 10 feet above the ground, she caught movement in her peripheral vision, a flash of metal from the eastern ridge. RPG, Hayes shouted just as Morgan banked hard to the right. The world exploded into chaos. The missile missed the main rotor by inches, but the subsequent volley of gunfire found targets. The helicopter shuddered as bullets ripped through its hull. I'm hit, Chen cried out, his voice tight with pain. Morgan fought to keep the aircraft stable as Hayes returned fire and Ramirez attended to Chen. The radio filled with the frantic voices of the intelligence team below, pinned down and desperate for extraction. Going in, Morgan announced, forcing the wounded helicopter lower. Morgan, the hydraulics are failing, Hayes warned, his face ghostly in the instrument lights. We're not leaving them behind. She brought the Black Hawk down hard skids, barely touching earth, as Ramirez provided covering fire. The intelligence officer and 2 of his team scrambled aboard, but the 4th man stumbled, falling to his knees as enemy fire intensified. Go, get out of here, the fallen man shouted, waving them off as he crawled toward cover. Negative, Morgan countered, holding position despite the aircraft's warning system screaming in protest. Hayes, take the controls. I'm going out. Captain, that's suicide. But Morgan had already unbuckled, grabbing a tactical vest and sprinting through the open door. Bullets kicked up dust at her feet as she reached the fallen operative, dragging him toward the helicopter with strength born of desperation. They were 10 feet from safety when the second RPG hit. The explosion threw Morgan and the operative forward, the concussive force momentarily deafening her. Through blurred vision, she saw Hayes fighting to keep the severely damaged helicopter airborne as Ramirez pulled her and the wounded man aboard. "Get us out!" Ramirez shouted over the cacophony of alarms and gunfire. Morgan reclaimed the controls from Hayes, whose right arm hung uselessly at his side, dark with blood. The Black Hawk shuddered violently, systems failing as she forced it up and away from the kill zone. "Chen's gone," Ramirez reported, his voice hollow. "Hayes is critical." The words registered like physical blows as Morgan fought to keep the mortally wounded helicopter in the air. Warning lights bathed the cockpit in crimson as smoke filled the cabin. Hayes lost consciousness beside her, slumping against his harness. "Command, this is Valkyrie 1-6. We are hit multiple times. 2 crew, KIA-1 critical. Request immediate case evac at Emergency Landing Zone Delta." Morgan's training took over as emotion threatened to overwhelm her. The Black Hawk wouldn't make it back to base. The hydraulic systems were failing completely, the tail rotor damaged beyond recovery. She'd have to put it down soon or lose everyone. Through sheer force of will and skill few pilots possessed, Morgan nursed the dying aircraft to the emergency landing zone, a small plateau 5 miles from the extraction point. The landing was more controlled crash than textbook touchdown, the helicopter skidding across rocky ground before coming to rest on its side. "Get them out," Morgan ordered Ramirez as she cut Hayes free from his harness and dragged him clear of the wreckage. The intelligence officer helped with the other survivors, while Morgan established a defensive perimeter. "Valkyrie 1-6 down at emergency LZ Delta," she reported, applying pressure to Hayes's wound. 2 KIA multiple wounded. Need immediate extraction." As they waited for rescue, Morgan held Hayes's hand, watching his life slip away, despite her desperate efforts to save him. By the time the rescue team arrived 20 minutes later, she had lost 3 crew members, Chen, Hayes, and now Ramirez, who had bled out from wounds sustained during the extraction. Standing amidst the smoking ruins of her helicopter, the same model that had carried her father in Desert Storm and her uncle in Mogadishu. Morgan Riley made a vow that would alter the course of her life. She would never fly again. Harrington Hall stood as a monument to old money and older traditions, its ivy-covered walls housing the prestigious Crisis Management Program at Liberty Crest University. Inside its oak-paneled lecture hall, Morgan Foster, formerly Captain Morgan Riley, sat in the back corner, her worn pencil moving methodically across a simple notebook. At 27, Morgan could have been any graduate student with her faded jeans, plain black hoodie, and scuffed boots purchased from a military surplus store. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face free of makeup. Nothing about her appearance suggested she had once commanded elite military operations or made life-and-death decisions under enemy fire, which was exactly as she wanted it. Her notes were organized with military precision, but what the other students couldn't see were the tactical formation diagrams she unconsciously sketched in the margins, muscle memory from years of mission planning. "Leadership during crisis," Professor William Harrison proclaimed from the podium, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored suit screaming old guard respectability, "is about projecting authority, about commanding respect through presence." Harrison paced with theatrical importance, gesturing grandly as he continued, "When disaster strikes, people look to leaders who appear confident, competent, and in control. They need to trust that the person giving orders has earned the right to do so." Morgan suppressed a bitter smile. Harrison, with his academic theories and consultant credentials, had never had to earn that right in any environment where failure meant death, rather than a poor performance review. "Miss Foster," Harrison called out suddenly, his eyes finding her in the back row, "you seem remarkably unconcerned with projecting leadership presence. Perhaps you could share your thoughts on why appearance matters in crisis situations." The lecture hall fell silent as 50 pairs of eyes turned to stare at the quiet woman in the corner. Morgan met Harrison's gaze evenly, her voice calm and measured when she responded. "In my experience, Professor, when people are genuinely afraid, they don't care what you're wearing. They care whether you can keep them alive." A ripple of surprised murmurs swept through the room. Professor Harrison's practiced smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "An interesting perspective, though perhaps somewhat simplistic. In professional environments, first impressions determine whether people listen initially," Morgan finished for him. "But real authority is earned through competence, not appearance." Harrison's expression hardened. "And what professional experience informs this opinion, Miss Foster?" "Various jobs," Morgan replied vaguely. "Different settings." Before Harrison could press further, the lecture hall door opened dramatically, revealing 3 students whose entrance was clearly designed to draw attention. Leading the trio was Cassandra Whittington, heir to the Whittington Defense Contractor's fortune. Her blonde hair styled in perfect waves, her cashmere sweater and designer jeans, announcing family wealth that stretched back generations. "So sorry we're late, Professor," Cassandra called out with practiced charm. "Daddy had an emergency board meeting about the new Pentagon contracts. He sends his regards." Harrison's demeanor transformed instantly. "Miss Whittington, always a pleasure. Please, take your seats. We were just discussing leadership presence in crisis situations." Flanking Cassandra were Tyler Brooks, son of Senator James Brooks, of the Armed Services Committee, and Megan Reynolds, whose father served as ambassador to NATO. They moved as a unit, the air around them charged with the easy confidence of people born into power and privilege. As they settled into front-row seats, Cassandra's gaze swept the lecture hall, pausing momentarily on Morgan in the back corner. Something flickered in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps? Or the predatory interest of someone identifying potential prey. When class ended, Morgan packed her notebook efficiently and headed for the exit, avoiding the clusters of students comparing summer internships at Fortune 500 companies and family vacations in the Hamptons. "Hey!" a voice called out as she reached the door. "You, the quiet one." Morgan turned to find Cassandra Whittington approaching Tyler and Megan, close behind all 3, regarding her with undisguised curiosity. "I don't think we've been introduced," Cassandra said, extending a manicured hand. "Cassandra Whittington. My father runs Whittington Defense." The name sent an involuntary chill down Morgan's spine. Whittington Defense, the company whose faulty equipment modifications had contributed to the death of her crew. The company she had spent the last 4 years quietly investigating. "Morgan Foster," she replied, simply accepting the handshake with careful neutrality. "Foster," Cassandra repeated as if testing the sound. "That's interesting. Are you local, or did you travel far for the Liberty Crest experience? West Coast originally." "California. How exotic." Tyler Brooks interjected, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And what brings you to our little program, family business, or are you more of a scholarship situation?" The implication was clear. "You don't belong here." "I'm here to learn," Morgan said, her tone even. Cassandra laughed, the sound bright and artificial. How refreshingly honest. Most of us are here to network, to make the right connections, but learning, that's very pure. Morgan's eyes flicked between the three students, recognizing the dynamic instantly.
She had seen it in military circles, in war zones, in every human environment. The establishment of hierarchies, the identification of outsiders, the subtle enforcement of social boundaries. "If you'll excuse me," she said, "I have another class." What Cassandra Whittington and her friends couldn't know was that Morgan Foster had survived environments far more hostile than a New England university. And she was here for reasons that went well beyond earning a graduate degree. The Whittington mansion stood on 20 acres of prime New England real estate, its Georgian architecture and manicured grounds a testament to old money and powerful connections. Inside its walnut-paneled study, Cassandra Whittington lounged in a leather chair worth more than most people's monthly rent, scrolling through social media on her phone. "I'm telling you," she said to Tyler and Megan, who occupied similar positions of casual entitlement around the room, "there's something off about her." "Scholarship girl?" Tyler asked, not looking up from his laptop. "What's her name again? Mitchell Martin. Foster. Morgan Foster," Cassandra corrected, setting down her phone. "And she's not what she seems." Megan Reynolds raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Because she wears off-the-rack clothes and doesn't worship at the altar of your family name?" "No," Cassandra said, leaning forward. "Because I ran a background check. Standard procedure for anyone who catches my interest." Tyler and Megan exchanged glances. Cassandra's background checks were legendary, a combination of family connections, private investigators, and occasional digital snooping that bordered on illegal. "And," Tyler prompted. "And she barely exists," Cassandra replied, frustration evident in her voice. "Morgan Foster has a driver's license issued 2 years ago, a rental agreement and basic credit history that starts around the same time. Before that, nothing." "Maybe she changed her name," Megan suggested. "Witness protection, criminal record secret pop star, trying to live a normal life." Cassandra ignored the attempt at humor. "Whatever she's hiding, I don't like it. Nobody comes to Liberty Crest without connections or an agenda. And if she's not here because of who she knows, then she's here because of what she wants," Tyler finished. "You think she's targeting someone?" "I think," Cassandra said carefully, "that having an unknown element in our program is unacceptable. Liberty Crest isn't for everyone, and some people need to be reminded of their place." The door to the study opened, revealing Charles Whittington, Cassandra's father, CEO of Whittington Defense, and one of the most powerful defense contractors in the country. At 62, he maintained the trim physique and commanding presence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Cassandra," he greeted, nodding briefly to her friends. "Professor Harrison called. Said you missed the first half of his lecture today." "Daddy, I told you your board meeting ran long. I was on the video call with your executive team about the new helicopter contract." Charles Whittington's expression softened slightly. "That's my girl, always putting the family business first." He moved to the bar cart, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch. "Harrison mentioned a new student in your program, someone asking uncomfortable questions about leadership theory." Cassandra straightened. "Morgan Foster. I was just telling Tyler and Megan about her. There's something strange." "Keep an eye on her," Whittington interrupted, his tone shifting from paternal to coldly professional. "Harrison and I have worked hard to ensure Liberty Crest's crisis management program produces the right kind of graduates with the right kind of thinking. We don't need anyone rocking the boat." The implication hung in the air, clear to everyone in the room. Liberty Crest University, like many institutions catering to America's elite, served as much to maintain existing power structures as to educate.
"Consider it handled, Daddy," Cassandra assured him with a smile that mirrored his own calculating expression. "No one rocks the Whittington boat." After her father left, Cassandra turned to her friends with renewed purpose. "Time for Project Foster. I want to know who she really is, what she's doing here, and how we can make her regret ever setting foot on our campus." None of them noticed the small red light blinking on Charles Whittington's desk phone, the line to his private study, still open. Every word of their conversation transmitted to the man who had taught Cassandra everything she knew about power and its application. Morgan's apartment was a study in practical minimalism. No decorative pillows adorned the functional couch. No artwork hung on the plain walls, except for a single framed photograph. 4 soldiers standing before a Black Hawk helicopter, their faces bright with the specific camaraderie of those who trust each other with their lives. She moved through her evening routine with military efficiency, physical training, protein-heavy meal review of the day's notes. After ensuring her door was securely locked, Morgan retrieved a laptop from a hidden compartment beneath her bed, activating multiple security protocols before accessing its contents. The screen illuminated her face with the glow of classified documents, technical specifications for Black Hawk helicopters, internal Whittington Defense Communications, Pentagon, contract reviews. 4 years of painstaking investigation into the equipment failures that had contributed to her crew's deaths. Morgan had long suspected the hydraulic failures in her helicopter hadn't been caused solely by enemy fire. The post-mission investigation had ruled it combat damage, but the pattern of system failures hadn't aligned with the impact points. Something had been fundamentally wrong with the aircraft before the mission began. It had taken 2 years of discreet inquiries, calling in favors from former military contacts and carefully cultivated sources within the defense industry to uncover the truth. Whittington Defense had modified critical hydraulic components to reduce costs, substituting military-grade materials with commercial alternatives that couldn't withstand combat conditions. Morgan opened a recently acquired document, a technical memo from Whittington's chief engineer to Charles Whittington himself, dated 6 months before her final mission. Project Achilles modifications to hydraulic couplings will yield 23% cost savings across the fleet. Testing indicates potential performance degradation under extreme conditions, but still within marginally acceptable parameters. Recommend implementation with controlled distribution of technical specifications to avoid unnecessary operational restrictions. Beneath the memo was a handwritten note: "Proceed with Achilles. Pentagon contract secured. Maintain strict compartmentalization. CW." The evidence was mounting but still circumstantial. Morgan needed the complete Achilles files to prove Whittington had knowingly supplied defective parts that contributed to American casualties. Her phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Still watching the skies." Valkyrie Morgan froze. No one at Liberty Crest knew her call sign. No one should have this number except the handful of former military contacts who understood the need for discretion. A second text followed Samuel Wilson Campus Security. "Served with Colonel James Miller, 100th. Bar. He said you might need a friend at Liberty Crest." Relief mingled with caution as Morgan considered her response. Colonel James Miller had been her mentor, the man who taught her to fly and later supported her decision to leave the service. If he had sent this security guard to contact her, there was a reason. "Meet tomorrow. Veterans Cafe on Main, 0700, she finally replied. The response came immediately. "Roger that, Captain." Morgan shut down the laptop, securing it in its hiding place before moving to the window. Pulling the blinds back slightly, she scanned the street below, a habit from years of operational security. A dark sedan was parked across from her building, too clean and new for this working-class neighborhood. Someone was watching her. The question was, who had sent them? Veterans Cafe occupied a weathered brick building 3 blocks from campus, its windows adorned with faded military branch flags and a simple sign reading, "All who served welcome." Inside the decor spoke to decades of American military history memorabilia from World War II through Afghanistan, displayed with respectful simplicity without the glorified commercialism of chain restaurants. A faded poster near the entrance showed the iconic image of American tanks rolling through the Iraqi desert during Operation Desert Storm, while nearby a shadow box contained a Purple Heart and bronze star belonging to the cafe's original owner. Morgan arrived at exactly 0700, choosing a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances. She ordered black coffee and waited observing the scattered patrons, mostly older veterans, starting their day with coffee and conversation about everything except the wars they had fought. At 0705, a man in a Liberty Crest security uniform entered. Samuel Wilson stood over 6 feet tall despite a slight stoop to his shoulders, his weathered face suggesting a man in his early 70s who had spent much of his life outdoors. His movements retained the measured efficiency of military training, eyes automatically scanning exits and potential threats before settling on Morgan. He approached her table with a nod of recognition. "Captain Riley. Or is it Foster now?" "Foster," Morgan confirmed, gesturing to the chair across from her. "You're punctual, Mr. Wilson." "Old habits," he replied, easing into the seat with the careful movements of someone managing old injuries. "And it's Master Sergeant Wilson, retired. 5th Special Forces Group, though that was a long time ago." "Desert Storm." Wilson nodded. "Among others. Served with Colonel Miller during the Gulf, then again as contractors after we both left active duty." He studied her face. "You look different from your pictures, but Miller described you perfectly. Said you were the best damn pilot he'd ever seen." The waitress brought a second cup of coffee without being asked, nodding to Wilson with the familiar acknowledgement of regular customers. "How is the colonel?" Morgan asked once they were alone. "Retired to Montana. Still complains about his knee more than the shrapnel in his back." Wilson's eyes crinkled with a touch of humor. "Says these young soldiers today wouldn't know a real war if it bit 'em on the ass. Then he sends them care packages every month." Morgan allowed herself a small smile. That sounded like the colonel she knew. Wilson's expression turned serious. "He asked me to keep an eye on you when he heard you'd enrolled at Liberty Crest. Said you were investigating something sensitive." Morgan's expression remained neutral. "Did he say what?" "Didn't have to. I worked security for Whittington Defense after leaving the service. Saw enough to know they cut corners when they thought no one was looking." Wilson leaned forward. "What I don't understand is why you're doing this alone. Military justice, FBI there are official channels." "I tried those first." Morgan interrupted, her voice low and controlled. "The initial investigation ruled it combat damage. Whittington has too many friends in the Pentagon, too many politicians in their pocket. Official channels hit administrative walls." Wilson nodded grimly. "So you created a new identity and enrolled at the university where Whittington practically owns the crisis management program, where his daughter and her privileged friends rule the social hierarchy. That's either very brave or very foolish, Captain." "I need access to information that doesn't officially exist. Liberty Crest is where those connections happen." "You should know," Wilson said after a thoughtful pause, "that you've been noticed. Not just by me. Cassandra Whittington has been asking questions about you, and Professor Harrison has taken a special interest in your background." Morgan had expected this. "How deep are they digging?" "Deep enough that you should be careful. Harrison isn't just a professor. He was a senior advisor at the Department of Defense, specializing in procurement contracts. He and Charles Whittington go back 30 years. This was new information, and it explained Harrison's theoretical approach to crisis management. He wasn't a field operator. He was a bureaucrat with academic credentials. There's something else, Wilson continued. A project called Achilles. I've heard it mentioned in Whittington's security office. Something about helicopter modifications that wasn't for public knowledge. Morgan's pulse quickened. Achilles, you're sure about the name? Positive. Security clearance levels were elevated around anything with that designation. Special access, eyes only. Wilson studied her reaction. Mean something to you? Maybe. Morgan wouldn't share her suspicions, not yet. Can you get access to Harrison's office, his computer? Wilson snorted. I'm a 72-year-old security guard, not James Bond, but I have access to most buildings, and people tend to ignore old men in uniform. He glanced at his watch. Speaking of which, I need to start my rounds. As he stood to leave, he placed a business card on the table. My direct number. Colonel Miller said you were one of the good ones, Captain. The kind who doesn't leave people behind. Remember, that works both ways. Morgan watched him go, turning the card over in her fingers. On the back, Wilson had written a single sentence. Watch for the ghosts of Squadron 45. Squadron 45, her old unit. The message was clear. The past she thought she'd left behind was catching up to her. Professor Harrison's Thursday lecture on institutional response to external threats droned on as Morgan took precise notes, carefully filtering academic theory through the lens of her combat experience. She had positioned herself in the same back corner, maintaining the low profile that had become second nature. Cassandra Whittington and her entourage arrived 10 minutes late, as had become their custom, disrupting Harrison's flow with their practiced entrance. Today, however, Cassandra's gaze fixed on Morgan with unexpected intensity, her usual dismissive glance replaced by calculated assessment. As the lecture concluded, Harrison cleared his throat dramatically. Before you leave, I'm assigning the semester's major project a comprehensive crisis management case study, worth 30% of your final grade. The announcement sent a ripple of murmurs through the lecture hall. You'll work in teams of 4. Harrison continued consulting a tablet. Analyzing real-world crisis situations and presenting recommendations based on established protocols. Team assignments are as follows. Morgan listened with growing unease as Harrison read through the list, a pattern emerging in the groupings, friends with friends, connections with connections. The social web of Liberty Crest, maintained through careful curation. Team 6, Cassandra Whittington, Tyler Brooks, Megan Reynolds. Harrison paused, his eyes finding Morgan in the back row and Morgan Foster. The lecture hall fell silent. Cassandra's expression remained unreadable, but Tyler and Megan exchanged surprised glances. Being assigned to Cassandra's team was usually considered a coveted position, a fast track to academic success through family connections and shared resources. Your team's topic, Harrison continued looking directly at Morgan, will be military crisis response protocols and their application to corporate settings. I expect comprehensive analysis, practical applications, and professional grade presentations in 3 weeks. As students gathered their belongings and formed into their assigned groups, Morgan remained seated, processing the implications. This wasn't random. Harrison had deliberately placed her with Cassandra assigned a military topic to her team, created a situation where she would either need to reveal her expertise or appear incompetent. Well, Cassandra said, approaching Morgan's corner with Tyler and Megan in tow, isn't this an interesting development? Looks like we'll be working closely together, Foster. Morgan gathered her notebook and stood. Appears so. We usually meet at my family's guest house to work on projects. Cassandra continued. The main library is so public, but I'm thinking for this project we might need more specialized resources. The topic is rather technical after all. Military crisis response. Tyler added his tone, suggesting the subject was as foreign to him as quantum physics. Not exactly something you pick up from a textbook. Morgan recognized the trap being laid. They expected her to either admit ignorance of military protocols or reveal knowledge that would raise questions about her background. I can handle the military research, she said simply. Cassandra's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. Can you? That's surprising. It's a highly specialized field with technical language and concepts most civilians find impenetrable. I'm a quick study. Megan laughed, the sound practiced and condescending. Morgan, we're talking about actual military operations, command structures, tactical decisions, high-stakes scenarios. My father works with NATO generals, and even he finds the protocols complex. I think I can manage, Morgan repeated. When and where do you want to meet? Cassandra seemed momentarily thrown by Morgan's calm. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. Marshall Library Private Study Room 3. Bring whatever research you think might be helpful. As Morgan walked away, she could hear their whispered conversation, speculation about her background plans to document her inevitable failure, the continuing construction of a narrative where the scholarship student would be exposed as out of her depth. Outside Harrington Hall, Morgan spotted Samuel Wilson making his security rounds, their eyes meeting briefly as she passed. His slight nod conveyed a silent message, I'm watching. As she crossed the quad toward her next class, Morgan noticed a dark sedan parked at the campus entrance, the same vehicle she'd seen outside her apartment. The surveillance was becoming more obvious, which meant either sloppiness or deliberate intimidation. Her phone vibrated with another text from her military contact. Achilles files located. Meeting arranged. 2 days. National Memorial Cemetery. Noon. 4 years after leaving Afghanistan. Captain Morgan Riley, now Morgan Foster, was being pulled back into a world she had tried to leave behind. But this time, she wasn't fighting for her country. She was fighting for justice for the men who had died under her command. The Marshall Library's private study rooms offered the illusion of academic focus, glass-walled spaces where Liberty Crest's elite could gather under the pretense of scholarly collaboration, while actually networking, socializing, and reinforcing the connections that would serve them after graduation. Morgan arrived precisely at 3:55 p.m. carrying a simple backpack containing her laptop and several books on military history and crisis management borrowed from the public library. She had deliberately dressed down even further than usual, worn jeans, faded sweatshirt, scuffed boots, knowing her appearance would further antagonize Cassandra and her friends. Study Room 3 was already occupied when she arrived. Cassandra sat at the head of the table in a position of assumed authority, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Morgan's monthly rent. Tyler and Megan flanked her like courtiers, their laptops open to social media rather than research materials. You're early, Cassandra observed as Morgan entered, her tone suggesting this was somehow a social faux pas. On time, Morgan corrected mildly, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. Tyler smirked. In Cassandra's world, being exactly on time is practically rude. The elite arrive fashionably late. Good thing I'm not elite, then. Morgan unpacked her materials with military efficiency. Megan's eyes narrowed at the implied challenge. So, Foster, what exactly is your background? You never seem to talk about yourself. Not much to tell, Morgan replied, opening her laptop. Shall we focus on the project? But that's exactly what we're doing, Cassandra insisted with false sweetness. Understanding team capabilities is fundamental to crisis management. We need to know what each person brings to the table.
Morgan recognized the interrogation tactic, establish a reasonable premise for questioning, then use it to extract information the subject might otherwise withhold. "I bring research skills and writing ability," she said simply. "Now, for the military crisis response section, I suggest we focus on three key areas: command structure during crisis events, information flow protocols, and decision-making frameworks under time constraints." Tyler leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And where exactly did you develop this expertise military family ROTC program, Call of Duty Marathon?" The dismissive question was designed to force Morgan to either reveal her background or appear unqualified. Instead, she opened one of the library books to a marked page. "Case Studies," she said, sliding the book toward them. "The military has been managing crisis situations longer and more systematically than any corporate entity. Their protocols are well documented and surprisingly applicable to civilian settings." Cassandra glanced at the book with thinly veiled contempt. "Case studies are fine for background, but this presentation needs insider perspective." "Fortunately," she smiled, reaching for her phone, "my father has arranged for us to interview General Robert Matthews next week, current Joint Chiefs Advisor and former commander of Special Operations in Afghanistan. He'll provide the authentic military perspective our presentation requires." The name sent a jolt through Morgan's system that she carefully concealed. General Matthews had been the overall commander during her final mission, the man who had signed off on the post-operation report, clearing Whittington Defense of any equipment liability. "That's helpful." Morgan managed her mind racing through implications. If Matthews was still covering for Whittington, his involvement could compromise her investigation. But it could also provide an opportunity to gauge what he knew about Project Achilles. "Isn't it?" Cassandra's smile turned predatory. "He's a close family friend. In fact, he's mentioned that he knew every special operations pilot deployed to Afghanistan during the final years of the conflict. Perhaps you've read about some of them in your case studies." The targeted reference was too specific to be coincidental. Cassandra was fishing, trying to provoke a reaction that would confirm whatever suspicions she harbored about Morgan's background. Before Morgan could respond, the study room door opened, revealing Samuel Wilson in his security uniform. "Pardon the interruption," he said, his weathered face professionally neutral. "Just checking that all study rooms are properly signed out." "We have this room reserved until 6, Mr. Wilson," Cassandra said dismissively. "Everything's in order." Wilson nodded, his eyes briefly meeting Morgan's. "Of course, Miss Whittington. Just doing my rounds." He lingered a moment longer than necessary. "You know my nephew served in Afghanistan. Helicopter mechanic. Said those Black Hawks were mighty fine aircraft when maintained properly." The seemingly casual comment hung in the air as Wilson departed, closing the door behind him. Morgan kept her expression neutral, but internally recognized the message. Wilson was confirming his knowledge of Project Achilles. "What a strange old man," Megan commented, turning back to her laptop. "Always making random conversation." "Security staff are supposed to be invisible, not chatty," Tyler agreed. "Someone should remind him of his place." Cassandra, however, was watching Morgan with renewed interest. "Did you notice how he looked at you, Foster, almost like he recognized you?" "I see him around campus," Morgan deflected. "He's friendly to everyone." Cassandra's fingers tapped a deliberate rhythm on the table. "Let's get back to the project. Morgan, since you're so interested in the military section, why don't you prepare a detailed outline of command structures during crisis events? We'll review it at our next meeting before the general's interview." The assignment was clearly designed as a test, a chance for Morgan to reveal her expertise or fail conspicuously. "I can do that," Morgan agreed. "Excellent." Cassandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. "And Morgan, make it comprehensive. General Matthews has very high standards. We wouldn't want to embarrass ourselves with..."
Amateur analysis. As the meeting concluded, Morgan packed her materials with practiced efficiency, aware of the scrutiny she was under. Cassandra and her friends had shifted from casual dismissal to active investigation, which meant Morgan needed to accelerate her own timeline. Outside the library, darkness had fallen across the campus. Morgan took a circuitous route back to her apartment, employing counter-surveillance techniques from her military training to identify anyone following her. The dark sedan was parked near the science building, its occupant invisible behind tinted windows. Her phone vibrated with another text from her military contact. Meeting moved up. Tomorrow. Veterans Cemetery. Noon. Something was happening. Her contact never changed. Established protocols without significant reason. The sudden acceleration suggested either a breakthrough in accessing Project Achilles files or a security concern that necessitated earlier transfer. As Morgan reached her apartment building, a figure stepped from the shadows near the entrance, a man in a military-style jacket, his bearing instantly recognizable to anyone who had served. "Captain Riley," he said quietly. "Or do you prefer Foster now?" Morgan tensed, ready for confrontation. "Who's asking?" The man stepped into the light, revealing a weathered face in his early 40s, with the hard eyes of someone who had seen combat recently. "Lieutenant Colonel John Parker, Special Operations Command. We need to talk." "I'm not in the military anymore," Morgan replied cautiously. "Whatever you're looking for—" "It's not what I'm looking for," Parker interrupted. "It's what's looking for you." He glanced around the darkened street. "And this isn't the place to discuss it. Your apartment is being watched, and not just by Whittington's people." Morgan assessed him quickly. His posture, the concealed sidearm beneath his jacket, the comm device in his ear, suggesting he wasn't operating alone. "Why should I trust you?" Parker handed her a sealed envelope. "Colonel Miller sent this. Said to tell you Phoenix rises at dawn. He said you'd understand." The phrase was a private code between Morgan and her former mentor, used only for verified communication. If Parker knew it, he had indeed spoken with Colonel Miller. "5 minutes," Morgan conceded, leading him toward a small coffee shop on the corner rather than her apartment. "Then you tell me exactly what's going on, and why my past is suddenly catching up to me." As they walked, Morgan scanned the street again, noting a second dark vehicle that had appeared since her arrival. The surveillance was escalating, becoming more obvious, which meant someone wanted her to know she was being watched. The night air carried a chill that reminded Morgan of early morning missions in the mountains of Afghanistan. She felt the weight of her sidearm's absence as she led Parker toward the coffee shop, the familiar tension of operational awareness returning to her muscles. Whatever was happening, whatever had brought a special operations officer to her door in the middle of the night, she knew with absolute certainty her carefully constructed civilian life was about to shatter like glass. The coffee shop was nearly empty at this late hour. A few students hunched over laptops in the corners, lost in the glow of screens and caffeine. Morgan chose a table in the back, positioning herself with clear sightlines to all entrances and exits, a habit as ingrained as breathing after years in combat zones. Lieutenant Colonel Parker settled across from her, his movements betraying the coiled tension of a man accustomed to constant vigilance. Up close, Morgan could see the fine lines around his eyes, the subtle signs of someone who had seen too much and slept too little. 2 minutes, she said quietly. Then I walked. Parker glanced at his watch. In approximately 72 hours, a special operations team will attempt to extract an American intelligence officer and his assets from a situation gone critical in Yemen. The mission parameters are nearly identical to your final operation in Afghanistan. Morgan's expression remained neutral, but her pulse quickened. I'm not military anymore. That's not my concern. It became your concern when the same helicopter modifications that contributed to your crew's deaths were installed in the extraction aircraft. Parker leaned forward. Project Achilles didn't end with your mission, Captain. Whittington Defense altered records, reclassified the modifications, and continued implementation under a different designation. How do you know about Achilles? Morgan asked, studying his face for deception. Because 4 months ago, another Black Hawk went down during a training exercise. 3 dead, 5 injured. The preliminary investigation pointed to catastrophic hydraulic failure, the same pattern as your crash. One of the survivors was my brother. Understanding dawned. This wasn't just official business for Parker. It was personal. The official report blamed pilot error. He continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. But one of the maintenance engineers noticed irregularities in the hydraulic components' deviations from military specifications. When he tried to document his findings, he was transferred to a remote base in Alaska. Morgan's mind raced through implications. If Whittington is still using substandard parts, then they're deliberately endangering American soldiers for profit, Parker finished. We need the original Achilles documentation to prove it. Without that, it's circumstantial easy to dismiss as isolated incidents or combat damage. And you think I have these documents? No, but we believe your investigation has gotten closer than anyone else. Parker slid a small flash drive across the table. This contains everything we've gathered: maintenance records, accident reports, technical specifications. What we don't have is the smoking gun, the internal communications proving Whittington knew the modifications were dangerous and implemented them anyway. Morgan didn't touch the drive. Why come to me now? Why not go through official channels? Because the Yemen mission was just greenlit by the Joint Chiefs using aircraft we believe contain the compromised components. And because Whittington's government connections have blocked every official inquiry. This has to be handled unofficially. The implication was clear. They needed a civilian with military expertise, someone outside the chain of command who couldn't be silenced through official pressure. There's something else you should know, Parker added, checking his watch again. General Matthews is personally overseeing the Yemen operation. The same General Matthews who signed off on the investigation clearing Whittington after your crash. Morgan's jaw tightened. The connections were becoming clearer. Matthews, Harrison. Whittington, a triangle of power and influence that had buried the truth about her crew's deaths and continued endangering other soldiers. My contact has the original Achilles files, she said finally. Meeting tomorrow at the National Memorial Cemetery. We'll provide overwatch, Parker replied. But be careful. Whittington's people have been tracking your movements for at least a week. They know something's happening. As if on cue, Morgan noticed a man entering the coffee shop, expensive coat, casual demeanor that didn't quite mask his professional assessment of the room. Private security, likely Whittington's. We're being watched, she murmured. You're 6 o'clock. Parker didn't turn. There's a service exit through the kitchen. My team has a vehicle waiting in the alley. No, Morgan countered. You leave first. I'll create a diversion, then exit separately. Less suspicious than us leaving together. A ghost of a smile crossed Parker's face. Still thinking tactically, Captain. Old habits, she replied, echoing Wilson's earlier words. After he was gone, Morgan waited 3 minutes, then deliberately spilled her coffee, creating enough commotion to distract the security man while she slipped toward the restrooms and out through the service entrance. The night air felt charged with renewed purpose as she made her way back to her apartment through a series of alleyways and side streets, employing counter-surveillance techniques that had once been second nature. For the first time in 4 years, Morgan felt the familiar clarity of an operational mindset, the focused calm that came with having a clear mission and defined threats. But as she approached her building, that clarity was shattered by the sight of police lights reflecting against the brick facade. Two campus security vehicles and a local police cruiser were parked outside the entrance, their presence drawing curious onlookers from neighboring apartments. Morgan melted into the shadows of a nearby alleyway, observing the scene. Through the glass doors of the lobby, she could see Samuel Wilson talking to a police officer, his expression grave. Something had happened, something serious enough to bring law enforcement to her building at this hour. Her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Your apartment compromised. Go to safe location. Will contact. SW." Wilson had sent her a warning. Whatever was happening, her apartment was no longer secure. Morgan turned away from the building, mentally cycling through her options. She needed a safe place to regroup, to process what Parker had told her, and to prepare for tomorrow's meeting at the cemetery. As she disappeared into the maze of side streets, Morgan Riley, once call sign Valkyrie, felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. 4 years of carefully constructed civilian anonymity had been stripped away in a single night, replaced by the urgent clarity of operational necessity. The soldier was back in the field. The abandoned boathouse on Liberty Lake had once been part of the university's rowing program before a new facility was built closer to campus. Now it stood forgotten at the water's edge, its weathered boards and clouded windows offering the perfect temporary sanctuary for someone who needed to disappear. Morgan had discovered it during her early morning runs, noting its isolated location and multiple exit points. She had even stashed a small emergency kit beneath a loose floorboard, basic supplies, a burner phone, and cash, following the military principle of always having a fallback position. She spent the night there using her backpack as a pillow, sleeping in short intervals, as she had been trained to do in combat zones. By dawn, she had formulated a plan, working through contingencies with the methodical precision that had once made her an exceptional commander. Her burner phone pinged with a message from Wilson. "Your apartment searched. Computer seized. They claimed suspicious activity report." Morgan's jaw tightened. Her laptop was clean. She kept all sensitive information on the hidden device, but the search itself was telling. Someone had escalated from surveillance to direct action, which meant her investigation had struck a nerve. "Who authorized the search?" she texted back. "Campus security request, backed by local PD." Harrison signed the paperwork. So Harrison was actively involved, not just passively supporting Whittington. That changed the dynamics, suggesting the professor was more deeply implicated in Project Achilles than she had initially suspected. "Need secure meeting location," she replied. "Critical information exchange at noon." Wilson's response came quickly. "Old munitions bunker. Montauk Point State Park. Access code 45 to 7238. Used for National Guard storage until 95. Off the books now." Morgan knew the location, a relic from World War II, so coastal defenses officially decommissioned, but maintained as an emergency supply cache by veterans who understood the value of preparedness. It was perfect, isolated, secure, and unknown to civilian authorities. She checked her watch, 0630. She had 5.5 hours to reach the National Memorial Cemetery, acquire the Achilles files from her contact, and then make it to the bunker for the rendezvous with Wilson. As Morgan gathered her few belongings, she noticed a solitary figure standing at the edge of the lake. An older man in a fishing vest, his attention seemingly focused on the water. But the rod in his hands wasn't moving, and his position offered a clear view of the boathouse. Amateur surveillance. Someone had tracked her movements, but lacked the training to remain undetected. Morgan slipped out the back of the boathouse, using the morning fog rolling off the lake as cover as she disappeared into the woods. By 0700, She had made her way to the small town adjacent to Liberty Crest, where she purchased basic supplies using cash, a change of clothes, a prepaid phone, and a local newspaper. The front-page headline caught her eye: Defense contractor announces major Pentagon contract for helicopter fleet upgrades. The accompanying photo showed Charles Whittington shaking hands with General Matthews at a formal ceremony with Professor Harrison visible in the background. The caption noted that Whittington Defense had secured a $1.2 billion contract to upgrade the military's Black Hawk fleet with proprietary hydraulic system enhancements. Morgan's blood ran cold. The Yemen mission would be using these aircraft. More soldiers would die if the Achilles modifications were implemented across the entire fleet. What had begun as her personal quest for justice was escalating into something far more urgent: a race to prevent future casualties. She needed those files. Today, the National Memorial Cemetery stretched across rolling hills, its ordered rows of white markers standing in solemn testament to service and sacrifice. Morgan arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to survey the grounds, identify potential surveillance, and plan exit routes. She spotted Parker's team immediately, 3 individuals positioned strategically throughout the cemetery, maintaining casual poses while establishing a security perimeter. They were good, but Morgan had been trained to recognize military personnel regardless of their attempt to blend in. At precisely noon, Morgan approached the designated meeting point, the Memorial for Operation Desert Storm Veterans. Her contact had chosen well. The location offered clear sightlines in all directions, while providing the respectful cover of apparent mourning. She stood before the memorial head, slightly bowed, waiting. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Her instincts began to prickle with concern. Her contact was military punctuality, was religion. Tardiness meant complications. At 12:17, a groundskeeper approached, pushing a wheelbarrow filled with soil and plants. His weathered face and calloused hands suggested years of outdoor work, but his eyes, sharp, assessing, professionally alert, belonged to someone with tactical training. "Terrible thing about Jenkins," he said conversationally as he stopped nearby, kneeling to work on a flower bed. Morgan recognized the authentication phrase immediately. "He always did fly too close to the sun." The groundskeeper nodded almost imperceptibly. "Package is compromised. Original files were moved last night. Secure server off-site location." He continued working his hands, never pausing. "But I have access coordinates. Memorial Bench Section 44A, under the right side armrest. Blue tape." Before Morgan could respond, the man tensed his gaze, shifting beyond her shoulder. "We're blown. Multiple hostiles, southwest entrance. Move now." Morgan didn't turn, didn't react visibly. Extraction plan. Maintenance shed east side. Vehicle waiting. The groundskeeper stood, gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. "Go. I'll create distance." As Morgan walked calmly toward Section 44A, she noted the 3 men entering the cemetery, dark suits, sunglasses, moving with the coordinated precision of professional security. Not military or law enforcement private contractors, likely Whittington's people. She reached the memorial bench and sat down, casually running her hand along the underside of the right armrest. Her fingers found the small package secured with blue tape, a USB drive, not the complete files she'd hoped for, but potentially the key to their location. One of Parker's team, a woman pretending to place flowers at a nearby grave, caught Morgan's eye briefly, a silent signal that they were monitoring the situation. The security team was spreading out methodically, searching the cemetery while trying to appear casual. Morgan stood, walking unhurriedly toward the eastern section of the cemetery. The maintenance shed was visible in the distance, a small structure partially hidden by a stand of oak trees. She maintained a mourner's posture, head slightly bowed, pace measured while calculating distances and timing. The security team was closing in their search pattern, becoming more focused. They had spotted her. Morgan quickened her pace slightly, weaving between the memorial stones. Behind her, she heard the sharp squeal of tires, a diversion created by the groundskeeper drawing the attention of two security men. The third, however, was still tracking her, his walk evolving from casual to purposeful pursuit. She was 50 yards from the maintenance shed when the man behind her broke into a run. "Miss Foster," he called out. "A moment of your time." Morgan sprinted toward the shed, abandoning the pretense of casual movement. The security man followed, speaking urgently into a wrist microphone as he pursued her. The shed door opened as she approached, revealing Parker himself, weapon drawn but concealed by his position. "Inside now," he ordered. Morgan ducked into the shed as gunfire erupted behind her, not aimed at her but at Parker's team, who had emerged from cover to intercept the security personnel. The exchange was brief but intense, professional operators recognizing the immediate threat level and responding with precise force. "This way," Parker directed, leading her through the shed to where a service vehicle waited, engine running. "My team will provide cover. Get to the coordinates on that drive. We'll rendezvous at the secondary location." As Morgan climbed into the vehicle, Parker handed her a satellite phone. "Secure communications only from now on. They're monitoring everything else." The drive pulled away as more gunfire sounded behind them, controlled bursts rather than panicked shooting. Parker's team knew their business, creating the tactical space needed for extraction while minimizing collateral risk in a public location. Morgan examined the USB drive, her mind already calculating next steps. The cemetery exchange had confirmed what Parker had told her. Whittington was willing to use armed force to prevent the Achilles files from surfacing. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was a coordinated operation to suppress evidence potentially sanctioned at the highest levels. As the vehicle cleared the cemetery gates, Morgan's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message. Whittington's security team mobilized across campus. Harrison, conducting emergency meeting with faculty. Your name mentioned, SW. The situation at Liberty Crest was escalating in parallel with the cemetery confrontation. Morgan needed to warn Wilson before their planned meeting. The bunker might already be compromised if Harrison was actively involving campus resources. She typed a quick response: "Abort bunker meeting. Surveillance escalated to armed engagement. Go dark and stand by." The vehicle turned onto a rural highway, heading toward the coordinates Morgan had received, a secure server location where the complete Achilles files were supposedly stored. But as the cemetery receded in the distance, a new concern formed in her tactical assessment. If Whittington's people knew about the cemetery meeting, what else had been compromised? And more urgently, who had informed them? The campus-wide alert system at Liberty Crest University activated at precisely 2:17 p.m., sending synchronized notifications to every student phone, faculty email, and digital display across the grounds. Emergency alert: hazardous materials incident reported at Riverside Industrial Complex. Campus lockdown initiated as precautionary measure. All personnel report to designated shelter locations immediately. This is not a drill. Cassandra Whittington was in the middle of her advanced political theory class when the alerts triggered, causing a ripple of concern through the lecture hall. Unlike most students who responded with varying degrees of alarm, Cassandra remained perfectly composed, exchanging a knowing glance with Tyler Brooks across the room. Within minutes, Liberty Crest's emergency protocols activated resident advisors, directing students to designated shelters, security personnel, establishing perimeter control, faculty members, assuming their assigned emergency responsibilities. The campus transformed from academic serenity to controlled chaos with remarkable speed. The primary shelter for Cassandra's section of campus was the Peterson Athletic Center, a state-of-the-art facility with reinforced construction, independent power systems, and capacity for over 1,000 people. As students streamed toward the building, Cassandra broke away from the flow, heading instead toward the administration building. "Miss Whittington," called out a campus security officer, "all students must report to designated shelters immediately." Cassandra didn't break stride. "Emergency exemption protocol. My father is on the board of trustees. I'm authorized to assist with administration coordination." The officer hesitated, then nodded, allowing her to pass. Cassandra's confident assertion of authority, combined with the Whittington name, overrode standard protocols without question. Inside the administration building, Professor Harrison was coordinating with security personnel, his usual academic demeanor replaced by the commanding presence of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Cassandra," he acknowledged as she entered, "your father's been notified. He's sending additional security to support campus operations." "Is it real?" she asked quietly. "The chemical leak." Harrison's expression revealed nothing. "The campus response is real. That's all that matters at the moment." He glanced at his watch. "Your father will be arriving within the hour. Until then, stay here, where it's secure." As Harrison returned to coordinating the emergency response, Cassandra slipped away to a private office, locking the door behind her. She removed a secure phone from her purse, not her personal device, but a specialized communications unit provided by her father's security team. "Status report," she said when the call connected. "Target not on campus," responded a clinical professional voice. "Last confirmed location was National Memorial Cemetery at 12:20. Engagement occurred with unknown military assets. 2 of our team injured, 1 critical." Cassandra's perfect composure faltered slightly. "Military assets, whose authority?" "Unknown. Professional operators, likely special operations background. They extracted the target heading eastbound. And the package, not recovered. Intelligence suggests target acquired access information rather than the complete files." Cassandra processed this information quickly. "Maintain surveillance on all access points to campus. If Foster returns, I want to know immediately." "Understood. Your father has authorized enhanced measures if necessary." After ending the call, Cassandra stared out the window at the streams of students flowing toward shelter locations, her mind calculating implications and contingencies. Morgan Foster wasn't just a scholarship student with an unusual background. She was something far more dangerous, connected to military operations and classified information that threatened Whittington interests. What had begun as a social targeting exercise, putting an outsider in her place, had evolved into something Cassandra hadn't anticipated. For the first time in her carefully curated life, she felt the unpleasant sensation of events spiraling beyond her control. Her phone vibrated with a text from her father. "Stay where you are. Secure room in administration building. I'm bringing a team." Something in the message's tone made Cassandra uneasy. Her father wasn't just responding to a campus emergency, he was mobilizing resources for an operation. Whatever Morgan Foster had uncovered, whatever threat she posed to Whittington, interests it was significant enough to warrant direct intervention from the company's CEO. Cassandra moved to the office's computer, entering her override credentials to access the campus security system. The emergency protocols had activated enhanced surveillance across all university grounds. Cameras, access logs, motion sensors, all feeding into a central monitoring station. With a few keystrokes, Cassandra redirected that feed to her screen, watching as the campus transformed into an ordered evacuation under the guise of a chemical threat. The security positions were concentrated inward rather than outward, focused on controlling the campus population, rather than protecting them from an external threat. The perimeter teams were checking IDs of everyone entering, but paying minimal attention to those leaving. This wasn't a protective lockdown, it was a containment operation. As that realization formed, Cassandra noticed Samuel Wilson on one of the security feeds. The old security guard was moving with purpose toward the eastern campus perimeter, his casual demeanor belied by his direct path and vigilant observation. He wasn't following emergency protocols, he was deliberately circumventing them. Cassandra zoomed in on his image watching, as Wilson paused to check his phone, then changed direction toward the old library archives, building a location not designated as an emergency shelter. Her finger hovered over the alert button that would flag his movement to security teams. Wilson knew something. Perhaps he knew where Morgan Foster was, or had information about what she was investigating. But before Cassandra could decide, a new alert appeared on her screen: Special Security Team arriving at North Entrance. Authorization: Charles Whittington. Clearance level Omega. Omega clearance, her father's private security force used only for the most sensitive Whittington operations. Whatever was happening transcended normal corporate security. This was a black operation on American soil, using a university campus as its staging area. Cassandra's carefully constructed worldview began to crack. She had been raised to believe in the Whittington legacy, America's defense contractor, protecting soldiers serving national interests. But special operators with Omega clearance weren't deployed for routine security concerns or corporate information leaks. They were the kind of assets her father deployed when permanent solutions were required. The World War II-era bunker at Montauk Point had been built to defend against German U-boats, its reinforced concrete walls and strategic positioning making it an ideal defensive position. After the war, it had served various military purposes before being officially decommissioned in the 1990s. Unofficially, a network of veterans maintained it as an emergency fallback position, a tradition dating back to the Cold War. Morgan approached cautiously, having abandoned the service vehicle several miles back, and continued on foot through dense woodland. Her military training served her well as she moved silently through the underbrush, scanning for surveillance or security measures. The bunker entrance was concealed beneath artificial rock formations, invisible to casual observation. Morgan entered the access code Wilson had provided, hearing the satisfying click of ancient but well-maintained mechanisms. The heavy door swung open on surprisingly silent hinges, revealing a dark passage leading underground. Motion-activated lights flickered to life as she entered, illuminating a space that had been modernized well beyond its original 1940s construction. Solar-powered electrical systems, communications equipment, medical supplies, and enough provisions for weeks of occupation, all maintained by veterans who understood that official protections sometimes failed. Morgan secured the entrance behind her, then moved to the communications station. The satellite phone Parker had given her showed no service underground, but the bunker had its own secure communications array, a system isolated from public networks and hardened against electronic surveillance. She activated the system, connecting to the secure server with the access codes from the USB drive. Within minutes, she had located the Achilles files, thousands of documents detailing the systematic substitution of military-grade components with cheaper commercial alternatives. The evidence was irrefutable. Charles Whittington had personally authorized the modifications to reduce costs and increase profit margins, despite engineering reports warning of potential catastrophic failures under combat conditions. More damning still was an email exchange between Whittington and Professor Harrison, dated 1 week after Morgan's helicopter crash. Need this contained immediately. Pentagon investigation could jeopardize entire contract series. Your DoD contacts need to redirect focus to combat damage assessment rather than equipment failure. CW, Harrison's response was equally incriminating. Already handling through Matthews. Investigation will conclude enemy fire as primary cause. technical inspections being managed by our people, documentation being redacted under national security protocols. This goes away if we all stay aligned. WH. The final piece of evidence was the most disturbing. A cost-benefit analysis prepared for Whittington Defense Board members calculating the financial savings of the modified components against the statistical probability of failure and potential liability costs. If failures resulted in casualties, projected savings per unit, $42,750, annual fleet-wide savings, $17.1 million, estimated statistical loss increase, 0.7% per combat deployment. Potential liability exposure, minimal under combat conditions where alternative factors, enemy action, provide attribution, pathway, recommendation, proceed with modification, program under classified protocol. They had calculated the value of soldiers' lives against profit margins and determined that the deaths were an acceptable cost of doing business. The bunker's perimeter alarm activated a silent alert indicating movement in the surrounding forest. The system's cameras showed 3 figures moving with tactical precision through the trees, their equipment and formation suggesting professional training. Whittington's people had tracked her to the general area, though they hadn't yet located the bunker itself. Morgan had limited time before they would establish a search perimeter and begin systematic clearing operations. As she downloaded the critical files, Morgan composed a message to Parker, attaching the most damning evidence Achilles' files secured. Definitive proof of Whittington-Harrison-Matthews conspiracy. Authorized component substitution despite known failure risks. Yemen mission using compromised aircraft. Must abort deployment immediately. She transmitted the message through the bunker's secure system, then began preparing for departure. The evidence was now in military hands. Parker could initiate official channels to ground the Yemen mission and prevent more casualties, but Morgan's mission wasn't complete. The conspiracy went beyond faulty helicopter parts. It revealed a systemic corruption that had cost American lives and gone unpunished for years. Whittington, Harrison, and Matthews needed to be exposed publicly, not just handled through classified military channels where their connections could still protect them. For that, Morgan needed to return to Liberty Crest. The campus lockdown provided the perfect opportunity. All key conspirators gathered in one location, focused on finding her, while unaware that she already had the evidence needed to destroy them. As she prepared to leave through the bunker's emergency exit, Morgan's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Wilson. Critical chemical threat, now real. Actual hazardous release detected at industrial complex. Campus in genuine danger. Emergency services mobilizing. Morgan stopped short. What had been a fabricated emergency was now real, whether by accident or deliberate action. The Riverside Industrial Complex was experiencing an actual chemical release that threatened the university campus. The tactical landscape had shifted dramatically. What began as Morgan's personal quest for justice, then evolved into a military operation to prevent future casualties, had now transformed into an immediate civilian crisis with thousands of lives at risk. And the people responsible for emergency management, Harrison-Whittington campus officials, were all focused on hunting her rather than protecting the students and faculty under their care. Morgan Riley had left the military 4 years ago, vowing never again to hold others' lives in her hands. But as she stood in that dark tunnel, the weight of command settled on her shoulders once more. Captain Morgan Valkyrie Riley was back on duty. The Peterson Athletic Center had transformed from a pristine sports facility to an overcrowded emergency shelter in less than an hour. Over 800 students and faculty members filled the main gymnasium, with more arriving as campus security continued directed evacuation. Professor Harrison stood on a makeshift platform at the center of the space, attempting to maintain order while coordinating with emergency personnel through a failing radio system. His academic confidence had eroded rapidly when faced with actual crisis management rather than theoretical scenarios. "Everyone remain calm," he announced through a bullhorn, his voice betraying the tension he sought to conceal. "This is a precautionary measure only. There is no immediate danger." Even as he spoke, emergency alerts updated on hundreds of student phones simultaneously. "Critical update. Hazardous material release confirmed at Riverside Industrial Complex. Shelter in place. Orders expanded to 3-mile radius. Air quality monitoring stations detecting elevated toxicity levels approaching campus perimeter." The gymnasium erupted in renewed panic as the reality of the situation became apparent. This wasn't a drill or a precautionary measure. It was an actual chemical emergency with potential health impacts. Cassandra Whittington watched from near the gymnasium entrance as Harrison struggled to maintain control. Her father had arrived 20 minutes earlier, immediately sequestering himself with security personnel in an office adjacent to the main shelter space. She had expected him to take charge of the situation, to demonstrate the crisis leadership that had built Whittington Defense into a corporate powerhouse. Instead, he had focused entirely on the search for Morgan Foster, deploying his security teams throughout campus while showing minimal concern for the evolving chemical threat. "Miss Whittington," a voice called from behind her. Cassandra turned to find Tyler Brooks approaching, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "What the hell is happening?" he asked quietly. "This was supposed to be a controlled operation to find Foster, but now there's an actual chemical leak. Did your father—" "No," Cassandra interrupted sharply. "This isn't part of the plan. Something went wrong." Tyler's expression darkened. "Wrong? What exactly was the original plan, Cassandra? Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like your father created a fake emergency that's now turned real, putting everyone in actual danger." Before she could respond, Megan Reynolds joined them, her phone displaying a real-time satellite image of the industrial complex. "The East Containment System has failed completely." She reported, her diplomatic training evident in her composed delivery of alarming information. "My father's NATO connections just sent this. It's showing chemical dispersion patterns heading directly toward campus." Cassandra examined the image, her stomach tightening at the implication. The satellite data showed a toxic plume expanding from the industrial complex, the leading edge already reaching the university's outer grounds. "Where's your father now?" Megan asked. "Security Command Center," Cassandra replied, "coordinating with his team." "Coordinating what?" Tyler demanded. "The search for Foster, while we're all about to be exposed to toxic chemicals." Cassandra hesitated, the carefully constructed narrative of her life suddenly colliding with urgent reality. Morgan Foster wasn't just a social outsider. She was a former military officer investigating Whittington defense operations. A potential whistleblower with evidence that could destroy her family's company and legacy. But that corporate threat suddenly seemed trivial compared to the immediate danger facing hundreds of students and faculty. "I need to find my father," Cassandra decided, moving toward the administrative offices. In the Security Command Center, Charles Whittington was engaged in intense conversation with his security chief, examining campus maps marked with search grid patterns. "Daddy," Cassandra interrupted, "the chemical release is real. We need to focus on evacuation and medical support." Whittington barely glanced up. "The situation is being handled by local authorities. Our priority remains locating Foster and securing company interests." "Company interests?" Cassandra repeated incredulously. "There are 800 people in that gymnasium, who could be exposed to toxic chemicals, and you're worried about company interests." Her father straightened, fixing her with the cold stare that had intimidated corporate rivals and government officials for decades. "Cassandra, you don't understand what's at stake. Foster has accessed classified information that threatens national security contracts worth billions. One minor chemical incident doesn't change our operational priorities." "Minor incident," Megan interjected, displaying her phone. "This is real-time NATO satellite imagery. The chemical release is Category 2 toxicity, approaching the campus perimeter now. Without proper containment and medical protocols, people will die." Whittington glanced at the image dismissively. "My security team has equipment for our extraction if necessary. The university's emergency management team can handle civilian concerns." "The emergency management team is Professor Harrison," Cassandra countered, "who's currently failing to maintain basic order in the gymnasium. He teaches crisis management theory, but has no practical experience." For the first time, doubt flickered across Charles Whittington's expression. His daughter had always been loyal to family interests, prioritizing the Whittington legacy above all else. Her challenge represented a fundamental shift. The command center door opened, revealing Samuel Wilson in his security uniform. The old guard's presence was so unexpected that everyone in the room fell momentarily silent. "Pardon the interruption," Wilson said, his weathered face revealing nothing. "But we have a situation in the main gymnasium. Medical emergency, multiple affected individuals. The ventilation shutdown has created dangerous conditions." Whittington signaled to his security chief, "Remove Mr. Wilson from the command area. He's not authorized." "Actually, sir," Wilson interrupted with surprising authority, "as campus head of security during declared emergencies, I have jurisdiction over all university grounds, including temporary command posts." He turned to Cassandra. "Miss Whittington, your expertise is needed in the gymnasium. Professor Harrison is requesting your assistance with organizing emergency response teams." It was a transparent pretense. Harrison had never acknowledged Cassandra's capabilities beyond her family name, but it provided the opening she needed. "I'll handle the civilian situation," she told her father. "You focus on your operational priorities." As Cassandra followed Wilson from the command center, the old security guard leaned closer to whisper, "Northeast maintenance corridor, 5 minutes. Come alone." The gymnasium's air quality was deteriorating rapidly. What had begun as uncomfortable warmth had evolved into dangerous heat-stress conditions, with the densely packed space becoming increasingly hazardous for vulnerable individuals. Medical personnel had identified 27 students and faculty members showing signs of heat exhaustion, with 3 requiring immediate intervention. Professor Harrison had abandoned his attempt to maintain central authority, now deferring to the university's medical director, who was rapidly becoming overwhelmed by the escalating situation. Cassandra made her way to the Northeast Maintenance Corridor, a service area connecting the athletic center to adjacent buildings. Whatever Wilson wanted to show her, it represented a decision point in her carefully ordered life. The corridor was dimly lit, and deserted emergency personnel focused on primary areas rather than maintenance passages. Cassandra checked her watch, exactly 5 minutes since Wilson's whispered instruction. "You're punctual," came a voice from the shadows. "That's promising." Cassandra turned to find not Wilson, but Morgan Foster, emerging from a service doorway. She wore different clothes than her usual campus attire, tactical pants, fitted jacket, combat boots, and carried herself with a different energy, a focused intensity that Cassandra hadn't observed before. "You," Cassandra breathed instinctively, reaching for her phone. "Don't," Morgan advised calmly. "We have approximately 12 minutes before your father's security team completes their current search pattern and redirects to this sector. I'd prefer to use that time productively." My father has the entire campus looking for you. I'm aware. Just as I'm aware that the chemical emergency is now real, that Harrison is failing to manage the gymnasium shelter, and that your father is prioritizing my capture over civilian safety. Morgan's gaze was direct, assessing. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Cassandra felt off balance for perhaps the first time in her life. The quiet scholarship student she had targeted for social exclusion was now controlling their interaction with unmistakable authority. "Who are you really?" she demanded. "Former Captain Morgan Riley, call sign Valkyrie, Special Operations Aviation Regiment 3 combat tours in Afghanistan." Morgan's expression remained neutral. "But more relevantly at the moment, I'm someone with extensive experience managing crisis situations involving chemical threats and civilian populations." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Morgan wasn't just a former soldier, she was Special Operations elite military. The implications reordered Cassandra's understanding of their previous interactions, of the quiet competence she had mistaken for social awkwardness. "Why are you here?" Cassandra asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why reveal yourself to me now?" "Because there are 800 people in that gymnasium who will be in serious medical danger within the hour if proper protocols aren't implemented. And because, despite everything, I think you care more about those people than about your father's corporate interests." The assessment was unsettlingly accurate. Cassandra had been raised to prioritize family legacy and Whittington corporate power, but the immediate threat to her classmates and professors had shifted her perspective in ways she hadn't anticipated. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "Access to the gymnasium's Environmental Control Systems Authority to implement emergency medical protocols and your father's security clearance to access emergency supplies in the athletics center storage facility." "And if I refuse?" Morgan's expression softened slightly. "Then I'll find another way to help those people. But it will be harder, slower, and potentially less effective." She checked her watch. 10 minutes remaining. Decision time, Cassandra. In that moment, Cassandra Whittington, heir to a defense contracting empire, social arbiter of Liberty Crest University, daughter of Charles Whittington, faced the kind of genuine leadership test that no academic course could prepare her for. A test of values rather than knowledge, of character rather than connections. "The environmental controls are managed through the facilities office," she said finally. "I have access. The emergency supplies will require my father's authorization code, but I know it." She met Morgan's gaze directly. "I want to know everything what my father is hiding, what you're investigating, all of it." "After we secure the gymnasium," Morgan agreed. "Right now, those people need immediate help." The gymnasium's main doors burst open, drawing all eyes to the entrance where Cassandra Whittington strode purposefully into the gymnasium, followed by Morgan Foster, whose appearance in tactical clothing, rather than her usual campus attire, caused immediate murmurs of confusion. "Environmental controls have been reset," Cassandra announced with practiced authority, moving directly to the medical triage area. "Air circulation will resume in filtered mode within 2 minutes. We've secured additional medical supplies from emergency storage." Morgan moved with military efficiency, organizing students into teams to distribute water, establish medical priority zones, and create improved airflow patterns using improvised fans. Her quiet commands carried an unmistakable expectation of compliance that even the most privileged students responded to without question. "Who authorized this?" Professor Harrison demanded, approaching Cassandra with the indignation of someone whose authority had been bypassed. The ventilation shutdown was standard protocol for chemical. Standard protocol assumes functional external filtration and limited shelter duration. Morgan interrupted without looking up from the medical chart she was reviewing. "Neither condition applies here. You're creating a secondary medical emergency through heat stress while attempting to prevent a chemical exposure that the filtration system is designed to handle. Harrison blinked in surprise at both the interruption and the technical assessment. And you're qualified to make that determination. How exactly, Miss Foster? Captain, Morgan corrected, finally looking up. Captain Morgan Riley, former SOAR chemical response trainer. And yes, Professor, I am qualified. She returned to the medical chart, effectively dismissing him. The revelation rippled through the gymnasium students and faculty alike, processing the transformation of the quiet scholarship student into a military officer taking command of an emergency situation. The gymnasium's ventilation system hummed to life, cool, filtered air beginning to circulate through the overheated space. Immediate relief spread across the room. The most basic improvement in conditions elevating morale significantly. Morgan had established a command post at the gymnasium's center, coordinating medical response supply distribution and communication flow with the efficiency of someone who had managed far more complex operations under greater pressure. What Harrison had failed to accomplish with academic authority, she achieved through demonstrated competence. Charles Whittington entered the gymnasium flanked by his security chief and 2 additional personnel. His expression darkened immediately upon seeing Morgan directing operations at the center of the room. "Security!" he called out sharply, pointing toward Morgan. "Detain that woman immediately. She's a security threat under active investigation." Campus security officers hesitated, caught between Whittington's authority and the obvious effectiveness of Morgan's emergency management. In the momentary confusion, Morgan continued coordinating medical response without acknowledging Whittington's presence. Cassandra moved to intercept her father. "Not now," she said firmly. "She's implementing critical medical protocols. Whatever your concerns, they can wait until the immediate crisis is stabilized." Whittington's expression hardened. "You don't understand what's happening, Cassandra. That woman has accessed classified defense information. She represents a national security risk that supersedes local emergency conditions." 800 people, Cassandra replied, gesturing to the gymnasium. "That's what's happening right now. 800 people depending on competent leadership that Professor Harrison couldn't provide, and your security team isn't trained for." Their confrontation was interrupted by Samuel Wilson, who appeared at Whittington's side with the calm demeanor of someone unimpressed by corporate authority. "Mr. Whittington," Wilson said evenly, "as campus head of security during declared emergencies, I'm implementing Code 7 Alpha protocols which place all civilian response resources under unified command. At present, Captain Riley has established the most effective response structure and will continue as incident commander until properly relieved by emergency services personnel." Wilson's tone was respectful but firm, carrying the weight of experience that couldn't be intimidated by corporate power. "Besides," he added with the ghost of a smile, "I've faced down Soviet T-72 tanks in Desert Storm, Mr. Whittington. Your stern look doesn't scare me much." The formal invocation of emergency protocols, delivered by a 72-year-old security guard with the quiet confidence of someone who had managed genuine crises, momentarily silenced Whittington's objections. Before he could formulate a response, the gymnasium doors opened again, revealing Lieutenant Colonel Parker and 2 individuals in military uniform. They moved directly toward Morgan, ignoring Whittington completely. "Captain Riley," Parker said formally, "Joint Special Operations Command has issued a priority tasking order based on your intelligence submission. I'm authorized to inform you that Operation Sandstorm has been suspended pending equipment review, and that a formal investigation has been initiated regarding Project Achilles under DoD Directive 55055. The military terminology meant nothing to most observers, but Charles Whittington's face, drained of color, the unmistakable reaction of someone hearing their worst fears confirmed.
"You have no authority here."
Whittington began regaining his composure. "This is a civilian emergency on private property. This is a designated federal emergency response zone as of 17 minutes ago," Parker corrected, producing official documentation. "The chemical release has been classified as a potential national security incident due to proximity to critical infrastructure. JSOC has assumed operational authority under Executive Order 12656. The gymnasium had fallen silent, hundreds of students and faculty watching the confrontation with growing confusion and concern. Morgan continued coordinating medical response as though the high-level standoff wasn't occurring, her focus entirely on the immediate needs of vulnerable individuals. "Mr. Whittington," Parker continued, his tone professionally neutral, but carrying unmistakable authority, "I need to speak with you regarding certain defense contracts and technical specifications. Specifically, Project Achilles and its relationship to equipment failures resulting in American casualties." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Whittington's security personnel shifted uncomfortably, suddenly uncertain about their role in what was evolving from corporate security to potential military investigation. "This is absurd," Whittington declared, though his confident tone had hollowed noticeably. "I've been a defense contractor for 30 years. My company has supplied essential equipment to American forces through multiple conflicts. Whatever this person has told you is clearly—" "Sir," Parker interrupted, "this discussion should continue privately. My orders include securing specific documentation and technical data related to ongoing defense contracts. Your cooperation would be appreciated." As Parker escorted Whittington from the gymnasium, the corporate magnate passed close to Morgan, who was instructing a medical team on triage protocols. For a brief moment, their eyes met Whittington's cold fury, contrasting with Morgan's professional detachment. "You have no idea what you've done," Whittington said quietly, for her ears only. "3 crew members," Morgan replied, equally quiet. "Chen Hayes Ramirez. Those were their names. The men who died because your company cut corners for profit margins." Something flickered across Whittington's expression, not guilt or remorse, but the calculated reassessment of someone adjusting strategy in response to unexpected opposition. "This isn't over," he promised before being led away by Parker's team. As the doors closed behind them, Cassandra approached Morgan, who had already returned to coordinating medical response efforts. "What just happened?" Cassandra asked. Morgan glanced up briefly from the medical chart she was reviewing. "Justice," she replied simply. "Or the beginning of it, at least." Before Cassandra could press further, the gymnasium's emergency communication system activated with a broadcast from the industrial complex. "Attention, all shelter locations. Hazmat containment teams have secured the primary chemical release. Air quality monitors showing decreasing toxicity levels. Maintain shelter-in-place protocol for approximately 1 more hour until final clearance is confirmed." A collective sigh of relief spread through the gymnasium. The immediate danger was receding. But as medical teams continued treating affected individuals as students helped distribute supplies and comfort those in distress, a more significant transformation was occurring. The artificial social hierarchies of Liberty Crest University were dissolving in the face of genuine crisis. Students who had once defined themselves by family connections and social status were now finding value in practical capabilities and willingness to help others. Faculty members accustomed to academic authority were deferring to demonstrated competence regardless of credentials. And at the center of this transformation stood Morgan Foster, formerly Captain Morgan Riley, quietly directing operations with the unassuming authority of someone who had commanded in far more dangerous situations. The second major twist in Morgan's carefully planned investigation had arrived. What had begun as her personal quest for justice had transformed into a public reckoning that would reshape the institution itself. The soldier who had hidden in plain sight was hidden no longer. The gymnasium doors opened to a campus transformed by morning light. The chemical emergency had been officially cleared at 2:14 a.m., but most students and faculty had remained in the shelter through the night, only now venturing out to a world that seemed oddly unchanged despite everything that had happened. Morgan stood at the entrance watching the dispersing crowd with the quiet assessment of someone accustomed to post-operation evaluations. The crisis management had been largely successful, 0 fatalities, 17 treated for heat-related issues, 3 requiring brief hospitalization but already released. Better outcomes than most military operations she'd commanded. Captain Riley. Morgan turned to find Professor Harrison approaching his usual commanding presence, diminished by rumpled clothing and the haunted expression of someone whose fundamental beliefs had been shaken. He had spent the night avoiding her managing peripheral tasks while ceding central authority to her more effective leadership. "Professor," she acknowledged evenly. Harrison glanced around to ensure privacy before speaking. "I wanted to, that is, your handling of the situation was—" He struggled visibly with words that didn't come easily. "You were right. About leadership. About authority being earned rather than conferred." It wasn't quite an apology, but from a man of Harrison's position and pride, it represented a significant concession. "The students performed well," Morgan replied, offering him a graceful redirection. "Your theoretical foundation gave them the terminology to understand what was happening, even if practical application required adjustment." Harrison's posture relaxed slightly at this diplomatic framing. "Yes, well, theory and practice often require integration." He cleared his throat. "I understand military personnel have secured my office and research materials, something about an investigation into defense contracts." "Project Achilles," Morgan said, watching his reaction carefully. Harrison's face drained of color, confirming his knowledge of the classified program. "I was following institutional directives," he said quickly. "The Pentagon approval came through official channels. All proper procedures were—" "3 of my crew died," Morgan interrupted, her voice steady but carrying the weight of steel. "HYN Ramirez. They trusted the equipment would perform as specified. They trusted the system that was supposed to ensure quality control. They trusted leaders like you to prioritize their lives over profit margins." Harrison had no response, his academic theories about crisis leadership suddenly inadequate when faced with the human cost of his administrative decisions. "Lieutenant Colonel Parker will have questions for you," Morgan continued. "I suggest you answer them honestly. The Achilles files have been secured, all of them, including your emails with Whittington and Matthews about redirecting the investigation." The professor seemed to age before her eyes, shoulders slumping under the weight of accountability. "What happens now?" he asked, sounding genuinely lost. "Now," Morgan replied, "the truth comes out. What happens after depends on how many lives were lost due to equipment failures that could have been prevented, and how many people tried to cover it up." As Harrison walked away, Samuel Wilson approached from the security office, his weathered face showing the fatigue of an all-night operation, but his eyes bright with satisfaction. "Not bad for a scholarship student," he said with a wry smile, "though I think your cover's officially blown." Morgan allowed herself a small smile in return. Maintaining a cover identity was never the end game. Finding the truth about what happened to my crew was. "And now that you have," Wilson asked. Before Morgan could respond, her satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Parker Matthews in custody. "Pentagon initiating full review of Whittington contracts. Press conference scheduled 1400 hours. Your presence requested. 4 years of investigation, of living under an assumed identity, of searching for the truth about what happened to her crew, all culminating in official acknowledgement and the beginning of accountability. Now, Morgan answered Wilson's question, justice has a chance. Wilson nodded, understanding the measured response of someone who had seen enough combat to know that clean resolutions were rare. Colonel Miller called, he said. Asked me to tell you he's proud. Said something about Valkyrie flying again. The mention of her old call sign stirred something in Morgan, not nostalgia exactly, but recognition of a part of herself she had tried to bury with her military career. Captain Morgan Riley hadn't just been a role she played. It had been her identity, forged through training and combat, and the sacred responsibility of command. The old bunker came in handy, Wilson continued conversationally. Those World War II engineers knew what they were doing, built things to last back then. Unlike modern defense contractors, Morgan noted dryly. Wilson chuckled, the sound carrying the gruff appreciation of a veteran who recognized gallows humor. Got a call from some old friends, he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Vietnam-era helicopter pilots, Desert Storm tank commanders, Afghanistan forward observers, word spreading through the veteran network about Whittington's equipment failures, about what you uncovered. Morgan had expected this, the tight-knit community of veterans, especially those who had served in combat roles, maintained connections that transcended official channels. News of corporate negligence affecting fellow soldiers would travel rapidly. They're calling it the Valkyrie Revelation, Wilson added. Has a nice ring to it. Before Morgan could respond, Cassandra Whittington emerged from the administrative offices, her designer clothing replaced by simple jeans and a university sweatshirt. Practical attire for an overnight emergency. Despite the casual clothing, she carried herself with the same confident poise, approaching Morgan and Wilson with direct purpose. My father's been taken to the Federal Building in Boston, she said without preamble. Military transport, no civilian attorneys permitted during initial questioning. I think that violates about 6 constitutional amendments. Special provisions for national security investigations, Morgan explained. The Yemen mission that was cancelled based on the Achilles files involved high-value intelligence targets. That elevates the investigation to counterintelligence jurisdiction. Cassandra processed this with the quick analysis of someone trained to understand power structures. So this goes beyond defective helicopter parts. Your father sold modified equipment to the military knowing it could fail under combat conditions, Morgan replied. Then he covered up those failures when they resulted in American casualties. That's not just corporate malfeasance, it's potentially treasonous if the intelligence community determines it compromised national security operations. The weight of these implications settled visibly on Cassandra's shoulders, the Whittington legacy built over generations, potentially destroyed by corporate greed and moral compromise. I need to know everything, Cassandra said, echoing her statement from the maintenance corridor. Not the military classification or the legal implications. The human cost. What actually happened? Morgan studied her for a moment, assessing her sincerity. The privileged student who had orchestrated a campaign of social exclusion was gone, replaced by someone confronting harsh realities about her family's legacy and her own complicity in maintaining systems that valued profit over human lives. Not here, Morgan decided. Meet me at Veterans Cafe in 1 hour. I'll tell you what happened in Afghanistan, what happened to my crew, what your father's company did, and what it cost. As Cassandra nodded and walked away, Wilson turned to Morgan with a raised eyebrow. You sure about that? She's still a Whittington. She deserves to know the truth, Morgan replied. What she does with it afterward will show who she really is. Wilson considered this, then nodded slowly. Speaking of truth, there's something you should know. That chemical leak wasn't entirely accidental. Morgan's attention sharpened. Explain. My contacts at the industrial complex confirmed that a maintenance protocol was overridden exactly 6 minutes before the containment system failed. Someone with administrative access disabled the safety redundancies. Wilson's eyes held Morgan's. The timing aligns perfectly with your father's security team arriving on campus. The implication was clear and disturbing. Whittington's operation to find Morgan may have included creating an actual emergency to flush her out, or to provide cover for more extreme measures. Can it be proven? She asked. Doubtful. The system logs showed a credentialed access, but the specific user information was purged. Professional work. Wilson's expression darkened. Creating an actual chemical hazard that endangered hundreds of civilians, that's crossing a line even beyond faulty military equipment. Morgan processed this new information, recalibrating her understanding of what Charles Whittington was willing to do to protect his company and reputation. If he would endanger an entire campus to capture one whistleblower, what else might he have done over decades of defense contracting? I need to speak with Parker, she decided. This changes the scope of the investigation. As Wilson nodded and turned to go, he paused and looked back. One more thing. Those students you organized during the crisis, the engineering team that restored ventilation, the pre-med students who handled triage, they're asking about you. Word's spreading about who you really are. What you did in Afghanistan. What's your point? Morgan asked. Wilson's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. Maybe Captain Riley has some teaching to do after all. Real leadership lessons, not the theoretical nonsense Harrison's been peddling. As the old security guard walked away, Morgan considered his words. She had come to Liberty Crest, seeking justice for her fallen crew, expecting to find enemies and obstacles. Instead, she had found unexpected allies, a community of veterans who still lived by the code she'd thought she'd left behind, and students hungry for authentic leadership rather than academic theories. The mission had evolved far beyond her original parameters, and like any good commander, Morgan Riley knew when operational objectives needed to be reassessed. Veterans Cafe was unusually busy for a mid-morning weekday. Word had spread through campus about Morgan's military background and her role in managing the emergency, drawing curious students and faculty to the one place they thought they might glimpse the mysterious former captain who had hidden among them. Morgan chose a table in the back corner, the same one where she had first met with Wilson, with clear sightlines to all entrances and minimal exposure to the main dining area. Old habits. The cafe owner, a Vietnam-era Marine named Frank, personally delivered her coffee with a respectful nod. "On the house, Captain," he said quietly. "Heard what you did at the shelter. Reminded me of a young lieutenant I knew in Khe Sanh. Calm under fire, took care of his people first." "Just did what needed doing," Morgan replied, the standard deflection of someone uncomfortable with praise for simply meeting her own standards. Frank smiled knowingly. That's what he would have said, too. He glanced toward the door. "Heads up, you've got company coming, and not all of it friendly." Morgan followed his gaze to see Cassandra entering the cafe, followed by Tyler Brooks and Megan Reynolds. The trio that had once orchestrated her social exclusion now approached with uncertain purpose, their dynamic visibly altered by the previous night's revelations. "Thanks for the warning," Morgan said, "though I think I can handle 3 graduate students." Frank chuckled. "After what you've been through, no doubt." He moved away as the group reached Morgan's table, leaving them to an uncomfortable moment of recalibration. "May we join you?" Cassandra asked, her usual authoritative tone softened to something approaching genuine request. Morgan gestured to the empty chairs. As they settled in, she noted the changes in their demeanor. Tyler's privileged confidence replaced by subdued contemplation. Megan's diplomatic poise overlaying what appeared to be genuine regret, and Cassandra's transformation, most striking of all, her perfect composure, now undergirded with purpose rather than entitlement. "I hope you don't mind that I brought Tyler and Megan," Cassandra said. "After what happened at the shelter after seeing you in action, they had questions. We all do." Morgan studied them for a moment before responding. "You wanted the truth. I assume they do too." All three nodded, though Tyler shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "Then I'll start with Afghanistan, 2018, Morgan began, her voice taking on the measured cadence of an official briefing. "Special Operations Aviation Regiment, 160th Night Stalkers, Squadron 45. I was aircraft commander of a Black Hawk helicopter callsign Valkyrie 16, conducting high-risk extractions of intelligence personnel from hostile territory." She described the final mission, the extraction gone wrong. The RPG attack, the hydraulic failures that shouldn't have been catastrophic, but were due to substandard components. She spoke of Chen Hayes and Ramirez not as statistics, but as men she had known and led and failed Chen with his collection of vintage cameras, Hayes, who kept a St. Christopher medal beside his instrument panel, Ramirez, who had been 2 weeks away from meeting his newborn daughter. The official investigation ruled it combat damage. Morgan continued, her tone neutral despite the subject matter. Enemy fire as primary cause, equipment failure as secondary contributor. But the pattern of hydraulic failure didn't match the impact points from enemy fire. Something was wrong with the aircraft before we took off. She explained her subsequent investigation, the years of discrete inquiries, the pattern of similar failures in other aircraft, the gradual uncovering of Project Achilles, with its deliberate substitution of military-grade components with commercial alternatives that couldn't withstand combat conditions. Whittington Defense saved approximately $42,750 per helicopter, Morgan said, looking directly at Cassandra. Multiply that across the fleet, and it represented about $17.1 million in annual savings. Their internal documents included a cost-benefit analysis that calculated the statistical probability of failure against the financial benefits. Cassandra's face had grown increasingly pale as Morgan spoke. "My father authorized this," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "His signature is on the implementation directive," Morgan confirmed, along with a handwritten note about maintaining strict compartmentalization. Tyler, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "My father sits on the Armed Services Committee. He would have had oversight on these contracts. Did he know?" "The documentation doesn't indicate congressional knowledge," Morgan replied carefully. "But the approvals went through official Pentagon channels, which means someone at the Department of Defense facilitated the process." "General Matthews," Megan surmised, her diplomatic training evident in her quick connection of political implications. Morgan nodded. "And Professor Harrison, who served as procurement consultant before joining Liberty Crest. The triangle of influence protected the program from standard oversight." The three students absorbed this information in silence, each processing the implications for their understanding of family legacies and institutional systems they had been raised to trust. "What happens now?" Cassandra finally asked, echoing Harrison's earlier question, but with genuine concern rather than self-preservation. "Military justice moves slowly but thoroughly," Morgan replied. "The Achilles files have been secured and authenticated. Joint Special Operations Command has initiated a formal investigation under national security protocols. Given the high-profile nature of the companies and individuals involved, there will be significant pressure to classify rather than prosecute." "They'll bury it," Tyler said bitterly. My father always says national security is the perfect cover for institutional corruption. The irony being that he's usually the one doing the burying. Morgan's estimation of the senator's son increased slightly. Perhaps there was more substance beneath the privileged exterior than she had initially judged. That's one possibility, she acknowledged. But there's a complication they didn't anticipate. What's that? Megan asked. Morgan allowed herself a small, grim smile. Me. I have copies of the complete Achilles files secured through multiple channels. If the official investigation stalls or gets redirected, those files go public. Every memo, every email, every cost-benefit analysis that valued profit over soldiers' lives. Tyler whistled softly. Mutually assured destruction. You're holding the entire military-industrial complex hostage. I prefer to think of it as accountability insurance, Morgan corrected. The military doesn't want this public any more than Whittington does. But I'm not interested in institutional protection. I want justice for my crew, and I want to prevent more soldiers from dying due to equipment failures that could have been avoided. Cassandra had been watching Morgan with intense focus throughout the conversation. You risked everything, she said quietly. Your military career, your civilian identity potentially, your freedom if they decided to classify you as a security threat. All for 3 men who died under your command. They were my responsibility, Morgan replied simply. When you accept command, you accept the obligation to those under your authority, not just during operations but afterward, making sure their sacrifices matter, making sure the truth is known. The cafe had grown quieter, other patrons sensing the gravity of the conversation at the corner table. Frank moved among them with quiet efficiency, subtly directing new customers to tables further from Morgan's position, creating a buffer of privacy. I need to ask, Cassandra said, meeting Morgan's gaze directly. When you enrolled at Liberty Crest, when you found yourself in Harrison's class in our project group, was it all tactical? Just positioning yourself to access Whittington connections? The question carried layers of meaning beyond its surface. A young woman trying to understand if every interaction had been operational rather than human. Initially, yes, Morgan admitted. Liberty Crest was a strategic choice because of Harrison's connections to the Pentagon and Whittington Defense. Being assigned to your project group was unexpected, but tactically advantageous. Cassandra nodded, accepting this with surprising composure. But, Morgan continued, tactical assessments change based on new information. Working with you, even with the social targeting you coordinated, provided insights I hadn't anticipated. Like what? Tyler asked. Like the fact that institutional corruption doesn't necessarily mean personal corruption, Morgan replied, looking at each of them in turn. You were all raised in systems that valued certain types of power and influence, but when faced with an actual crisis, you each made individual choices that weren't dictated by those systems. She turned to Cassandra. You chose the safety of students over family loyalty. To Megan, you used diplomatic connections to access critical information rather than protect institutional relationships. To Tyler, you questioned authority structures you'd been raised to navigate but never challenge. The 3 students exchanged glances, perhaps seeing each other in a new light after Morgan's assessment. So where does this leave us? Cassandra asked. My father's being questioned by military authorities. The Whittington name is about to become synonymous with corporate negligence and potentially treason. The university's star professor is implicated in covering up equipment failures that killed American soldiers. She gestured around the cafe. And everyone on campus now knows that the scholarship student we targeted is actually an elite military officer who saved lives during a chemical emergency. Morgan took a deliberate sip of her coffee before responding. It leaves us at a decision point. Institutions like Liberty Crest, like Whittington Defense, like the Pentagon, they are made of people making individual choices. Some of those choices prioritize power and profit. Others prioritize truth and responsibility. She leaned forward slightly. The question isn't what happens to those institutions. It's what choices you make going forward now that you know the truth about how they operate. Before any of them could respond, Morgan's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Parker Press Conference moved up. 1200 hours. Pentagon representatives arriving on campus. Whittington in transit from Boston. The timeline was accelerating. Whatever was happening with the official investigation, it had shifted from contained military inquiry to public acknowledgement, a significant deviation from standard procedure for classified programs. "I need to go," Morgan said, rising from the table. "There's a military press conference at noon. Something's happening with the investigation." As she turned to leave, Cassandra called after her, "Captain Riley." When Morgan paused, Cassandra continued, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just about what my father's company did, but about how we treated you. We saw what we expected to see, not who you actually were." Morgan studied her briefly. "We all wear masks, Cassandra. The difference is whether they're hiding something or revealing it." With that cryptic response, she left the cafe feeling the weight of dozens of eyes following her departure. Outside, the morning air carried the crisp clarity of early autumn, the campus grounds returning to normal operations after the emergency. Students moved between buildings with the purposeful energy of academic routine, though Morgan noticed many of them watching her with new awareness as she passed. Her cover identity was well and truly blown. Captain Morgan Riley had emerged from the carefully constructed anonymity of Morgan Foster, revealed not just to military authorities or Whittington executives, but to the entire university community. The quiet scholarship student in thrift store clothes had been replaced by the military officer who had taken command during crisis. As she walked toward the administration building where Parker had indicated the press conference would be held, Morgan considered the implications of this public revelation. Her original mission parameters had focused on justice for her crew, on holding Whittington accountable for the equipment failures that contributed to their deaths. But the mission had evolved, as military operations often did, into something more complex, with broader strategic implications and unexpected allies. The institutional corruption she had uncovered went beyond one defense contractor or one university professor. It revealed a system of influence and protection that prioritized profit and power over the lives of those who served. And now, with military authorities bringing that system into public view, rather than classifying it under national security protocols, Morgan found herself at the center of a potential reckoning that would extend far beyond her original objectives. The soldier had completed her mission. But Captain Morgan Riley's war was just beginning. The administration building's main conference room had been hastily converted into a press facility with cameras and recording equipment from multiple news organizations positioned around a central podium. Military personnel in full-dress uniform stood at parade rest along the back wall. Representatives from Joint Special Operations Command, the Pentagon's Inspector General's Office, and the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Parker met Morgan at the side entrance, his usual combat utility uniform replaced by formal military dress medals and ribbons attesting to a distinguished career. "Situations evolved," he said without preamble. "Director of Military Intelligence is personally overseeing the Achilles investigation. White House has been briefed. This is going public in a way that doesn't happen with classified programs." "Why?" Morgan asked, suspicious of the uncharacteristic transparency. "Military investigations involving defense contractors are typically handled behind closed doors, especially when they implicate high-ranking officials." Parker's expression remained professional, but his eyes conveyed genuine respect. Because your evidence was too comprehensive to contain. The Achilles files didn't just document one equipment failure or one helicopter crash. They revealed a systematic pattern of substitutions across multiple platforms, potentially affecting every branch of the military. He handed her a tablet displaying a preliminary analysis from the Pentagon. Initial review indicates Whittington Defense implemented similar modifications to transport vehicles, communication systems, and protective equipment. The potential casualty implications extend beyond your crew captain. We're looking at dozens of incidents previously attributed to combat damage or operator error that may actually have resulted from equipment failures. Morgan absorbed this information with growing cold anger. The scope was far worse than she had initially uncovered, not just helicopters, but multiple systems that soldiers relied on for their safety and effectiveness. "The director wants you at the podium," Parker continued. "Your investigation, your evidence, your crew. Military justice will handle the legal proceedings, but the public narrative begins with you." Morgan had not anticipated this development. She had expected to provide testimony in a classified military investigation, perhaps serve as a witness in eventual legal proceedings. Public spokesman was not a role she had prepared for. "Why me?" she asked. "The military has professional public affairs officers. This should come from official channels." "Because you're the story people will connect with," Parker replied pragmatically. "Special operations pilot who lost her crew, spent 4 years investigating the truth, enrolled in civilian graduate school to access the evidence. It has integrity that an official military statement lacks." Before Morgan could respond, the conference room doors opened, revealing Charles Whittington being escorted by military police, not in handcuffs, but clearly under restriction. His usual commanding presence had diminished his expression, betraying the strain of someone facing consequences after decades of operating above them. Their eyes met across the room, Morgan still in the tactical clothing she had worn during the emergency, Whittington in an expensive suit that suddenly seemed like costume rather than armor. For a brief moment, recognition passed between them, not as adversaries in a legal battle, but as people who understood the weight of decisions that affected others' lives. Then Whittington was guided to a seat at the side of the room, and the moment passed. Professor Harrison entered next, accompanied by university administrators, who appeared visibly uncomfortable with the military presence on their campus. Harrison's academic authority had been stripped away by the night's events, replaced by the uncertain status of someone implicated in a developing scandal. The room filled quickly with journalists, military personnel, and university officials. Morgan noted Cassandra Tyler and Megan slipping in through a side door, positioning themselves near the back where they could observe without being immediately associated with the proceedings. At precisely noon, the Director of Military Intelligence approached the podium, a 3-star general whose reputation for integrity had survived multiple administrations. His presence alone signaled the seriousness with which the Pentagon was treating the investigation. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to navigating complex political and military landscapes. "I am Lieutenant General Robert Harkins, Director of Military Intelligence. I am here today to address serious allegations regarding defense contracting practices that may have compromised military equipment reliability and, potentially, contributed to American casualties." The room fell silent as journalists recognized the unprecedented nature of the statement, a high-ranking military official publicly acknowledging potential corporate negligence rather than managing it through classified channels. "The Department of Defense has initiated a comprehensive investigation into what has been designated as Project Achilles, a series of unauthorized modifications to military equipment specifications implemented by Whittington defense contractors between 2015 and the present day." Cameras turned briefly toward Charles Whittington, capturing his stoic expression for news broadcasts that would soon reach millions of Americans. These modifications involved the substitution of military-grade components with commercial alternatives that did not meet established durability and performance standards for combat conditions, the general continued. Initial evidence indicates these substitutions were implemented to reduce production costs while maintaining contract pricing, resulting in significant profit increases for Whittington Defense. The clinical description belied the human impact soldiers who had died because equipment failed when they needed it most. The investigation was initiated based on evidence compiled by Captain Morgan Riley, formerly of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The general turned toward Morgan, gesturing for her to join him at the podium. Captain Riley's helicopter crashed during a high-risk extraction mission in Afghanistan in 2018, resulting in the deaths of 3 crew members. Her subsequent investigation revealed that equipment failures resulting from these unauthorized modifications likely contributed to the crash. Morgan approached the podium with the measured stride of someone accustomed to military formality, her tactical clothing contrasting with the formal uniforms and business attire surrounding her. The symbolism wasn't lost on the journalists present, the warrior among politicians and executives representing those who bore the consequences of decisions made in boardrooms and offices. Captain Riley will provide details regarding her investigation and findings. The general concluded, stepping aside to give her the podium. Morgan surveyed the room briefly, identifying the key stakeholders, military authorities, corporate representatives, university officials, media outlets. Then her gaze settled on the back of the room, where Samuel Wilson stood beside a group of men and women whose bearing immediately identified them as veterans. Drawing strength from their presence, Morgan began. In April 2018, I commanded a Black Hawk helicopter during a high-risk extraction mission in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. My crew consisted of Lieutenant David Hayes, Master Sergeant Christopher Ramirez, and Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, all experienced operators with multiple combat deployments. Her voice remained steady as she described the mission, the enemy engagement, the catastrophic hydraulic failures that shouldn't have resulted from the damage sustained. The initial investigation concluded that enemy fire was the primary cause of the crash. I knew that assessment was incomplete, based on the pattern of system failures and my familiarity with the aircraft's design specifications. Morgan outlined her subsequent investigation, the years of methodical research, the pattern of similar failures in other aircraft, the eventual discovery of Project Achilles, and its deliberate modification of critical components. What I discovered wasn't just corporate negligence or cost-cutting measures. It was a systematic program to substitute military-grade materials with commercial alternatives that couldn't withstand combat conditions, implemented with full knowledge of the increased failure risk, approved at the highest levels of Whittington Defense, and concealed through manipulation of Pentagon procurement channels. The room had grown completely silent, journalists abandoning their typical murmured conversations to focus entirely on Morgan's testimony. 3 men died under my command, she continued, her voice taking on an edge of controlled intensity. Hayes, Ramirez, Chen. They trusted their equipment would perform as specified. They trusted the system that was supposed to ensure quality control. They trusted that the country they served valued their lives more than profit margins. Morgan made eye contact with Charles Whittington before continuing. The Achilles files I uncovered include internal communications confirming that Whittington Defense conducted cost-benefit analyses comparing the financial savings of component substitutions against the statistical probability of equipment failures. They calculated the value of soldiers' lives and determined that the deaths were an acceptable cost of doing business. A ripple of reaction moved through the room, journalists straightening in their seats, military personnel exchanging glances, university officials shifting uncomfortably. This investigation isn't about one helicopter crash or 3 casualties, Morgan concluded. The preliminary Pentagon review indicates similar modifications were implemented across multiple platforms, potentially affecting transport vehicles, communication systems, and protective equipment used by all branches of the military. The full impact in terms of casualties and compromised operations has yet to be determined. As Morgan stepped back from the podium, General Harkins returned to outline the next steps: a comprehensive review of all Whittington defense contracts, forensic accounting of procurement processes, evaluation of all equipment failures previously attributed to combat damage or operator error. This investigation will proceed regardless of political pressure or corporate influence, the general stated firmly. The Department of Defense's primary obligation is to the men and women who serve this country, not to defense contractors or procurement officials. The statement represented a remarkable public commitment from military leadership, one that would be difficult to walk back or redirect through the usual channels of influence. As the press conference transitioned to questions from journalists, Morgan stepped away from the podium, moving to the side of the room where Parker waited. "Well done," he said quietly. "The director's impressed. Said you hit exactly the right tone, professional but personal, technical but accessible." "I wasn't trying to impress anyone," Morgan replied. "I was just telling the truth about what happened to my crew." Parker nodded, understanding the distinction. "The Pentagon's established a joint task force to review all equipment failures dating back to 2015. They're calling it Operation Phoenix, appropriate given your involvement." Morgan raised an eyebrow at the name, recognizing the symbolism of rebirth from ashes, both for the investigation emerging from classified suppression and for her own reemergence as Captain Riley after years as Morgan Foster. "What happens to Whittington?" she asked, glancing toward the defense contractor, who was now surrounded by attorneys. "Military justice moves at its own pace," Parker replied. "But with the evidence you secured and the director's personal involvement, there's no burying this. Whittington Defense will face criminal charges, financial penalties, and contract cancellations. Charles Whittington himself is looking at potential charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for defrauding the government and endangering military personnel." Morgan absorbed this information with the measured assessment of someone who understood that justice systems like military operations rarely delivered clean or complete resolution. And Harrison Matthews, both under investigation for their roles in facilitating and concealing the modifications. Matthews has been relieved of command pending review. Harrison's academic tenure won't protect him from criminal charges if the evidence supports them. A commotion at the back of the room drew their attention. Samuel Wilson was escorting a group of individuals in civilian clothing through the press conference, men and women whose bearing immediately identified them as military despite their lack of uniforms. "Who are they?" Parker asked, noting Morgan's sudden focus. "Veterans," she replied, recognizing the connection immediately. Wilson mentioned the Old Guard network was spreading word about Whittington's equipment failures. The group moved through the room with quiet purpose, positioning themselves along the walls, their presence creating an unmistakable message without a word being spoken. These were the people who had served, who had relied on equipment like that modified by Whittington, who understood the real stakes beyond profit margins and stock prices. Among them, Morgan recognized veterans from Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan, a cross-generational representation of America's military legacy. Their silent presence transformed the atmosphere from a standard press conference to something more profound, a reckoning between those who served and those who had betrayed that service. Charles Whittington noticed them too, his expression shifting from corporate composure to something approaching genuine discomfort as he registered their steady, unyielding observation. As the press conference concluded, journalists swarmed toward Whittington and military officials seeking additional statements and clarifications. Morgan slipped away through a side door seeking momentary respite from the intense scrutiny that had replaced her years of anonymity. In the quiet of an empty office, she allowed herself a moment of reflection on Hayes, Ramirez, and Chen, on the long journey from that crashed helicopter in Afghanistan to this university campus in New England, on the unexpected allies and adversaries she had encountered along the way. The door opened quietly, revealing Cassandra Whittington. Gone was the perfect composure that had defined her campus presence, replaced by the vulnerable uncertainty of someone whose foundations had been shaken. "They're going to destroy him," she said without preamble. "My father, the company, the Whittington legacy, everything." Morgan studied her carefully before responding. "Your father made decisions that cost soldiers their lives. The Whittington legacy includes calculating the acceptable number of military casualties against profit margins. Maybe that legacy should be reconsidered." Cassandra flinched at the directness but didn't retreat. "I'm not defending what he did. I'm trying to understand what happens next. For him, for the company, for me." "That depends on choices," Morgan replied. "Your father chose profit over safety, then chose cover-up over accountability. Those choices have consequences." "And what about my choices?" Cassandra asked, her voice steadying. "I didn't know about Project Achilles. I didn't authorize component substitutions or cover-up equipment failures. But I benefited from the system that allowed it to happen. I'm complicit, even if I wasn't directly involved." The assessment showed a self-awareness that Morgan hadn't expected, a willingness to acknowledge indirect responsibility, rather than distance herself from her father's actions. "Then make different choices going forward," Morgan said simply. "The Whittington name and resources give you influence. How you use that influence matters more than where it came from." Before Cassandra could respond, Samuel Wilson appeared at the door. "Captain Riley," he said, his formal address acknowledging her fully restored identity, "there are some people who'd like to meet you." Morgan followed Wilson back to the main conference room, now largely emptied of journalists and officials. The veterans who had stood silent witness during the press conference remained joined now by Lieutenant Colonel Parker and several military representatives. "Captain Riley," one of them said, stepping forward with the measured movements of someone managing old injuries. "Master Sergeant James Collins, retired, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 tours in Afghanistan." He extended his hand. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done." Morgan accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip of someone who had maintained military bearing despite civilian years. "I was just seeking justice for my crew," she replied. "It's more than that," Collins countered. "I lost 2 men in a transport accident in 2019, vehicle rollover during a routine patrol. Official report blamed road conditions and driver error. After hearing about your investigation, I'm wondering if Whittington's modifications played a role." One by one, the veterans approached with similar stories, equipment failures attributed to combat conditions, or operator error incidents that had never received proper investigation questions that had remained unanswered until Morgan's revelation provided a new context for understanding them. What had begun as her personal quest for justice for 3 fallen comrades was expanding into something far more significant, a reckoning for the entire system that had valued profit over the lives of those who served. As Morgan listened to their stories, she felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders once more, not as an aircraft pilot responsible for a single crew, but as the voice for countless service members whose equipment had failed them when they needed it most. The mission parameters had expanded beyond her original objectives, and like any good commander, Captain Morgan Riley was prepared to adapt to the evolving operational landscape. 1 week later, the university quad was bathed in golden autumn light. As students moved between classes, the rhythms of academic life restored after the disruption of the chemical emergency and subsequent revelations. But subtle changes were evident to the observant eye. Increased media presence at the campus perimeter, security personnel more visible than usual, and conversations that turned toward military affairs and corporate accountability rather than social events and academic politics. Morgan stood at the edge of the quad, watching the flow of students with the assessment of someone preparing to depart a temporary posting. Her civilian clothing had been replaced by her formal military uniform, the insignia and decorations telling the story of her service for those who knew how to read such things. The Pentagon had recalled her to active duty temporarily. They assured her to assist with the expanding investigation into Whittington defense and potential equipment failures across multiple military platforms. Her expertise as both pilot and investigator made her uniquely valuable to Operation Phoenix, now formally established as a joint task force examining every aspect of defense contracting and procurement. "The uniform suits you," Samuel Wilson observed, approaching with his characteristic quiet movement. "More authentic than the scholarship student costume." Morgan allowed herself a small smile. Both were authentic in their own way, different aspects of the same person. Wilson nodded, understanding the nuance. "Pentagon keeping you busy. 3 separate investigation teams, coordination with the Inspector General's office, testimony for the Congressional Oversight Committee," Morgan confirmed. "The Achilles files opened questions that go well beyond Whittington defense. The entire military procurement system is under scrutiny." "Good," Wilson said firmly. "Long overdue. When I was in Desert Storm, we had equipment problems that never got proper investigation. Always chalked up to battlefield conditions or operational stress. Makes you wonder how many other Whittingtons are out there cutting corners on things soldiers rely on." The concern was valid and expanded the scope of what Morgan had uncovered. Project Achilles might have been particularly egregious, but the system that allowed it to exist could be harboring similar programs under different names and different contractors. "How's the campus adjustment going?" Morgan asked, noting the increased security presence around the administration building. Wilson chuckled. "Board of Trustees is in full damage control mode. 3 members resigned when their connections to Whittington defense became public. President Hargrove is talking about institutional transparency and ethical re-evaluation like they're concepts he just invented." The university's reputation had suffered significant damage from its association with Whittington and Harrison, with questions about how deeply the corruption had penetrated academic programs and research initiatives. "And Harrison, administrative leave pending investigation," Wilson replied. "His office remains sealed by military authorities. Most of his academic work is being reviewed for potential conflicts of interest with his Pentagon consulting role." Morgan nodded, unsurprised by the institutional response. Universities, like military organizations, protected themselves when threatened, sometimes at the expense of individual members. "I hear you've become something of a campus celebrity," Wilson added with a hint of amusement. "The quiet scholarship student who turned out to be a decorated special operations pilot and saved hundreds of lives during a chemical emergency. Students are petitioning the administration to establish a course on practical crisis management with you as the instructor." The idea was so far from Morgan's expected trajectory that she couldn't help but laugh. "I'm not an academic, Wilson. I'm a soldier who spent 4 years pretending to be a student." "Maybe," Wilson conceded. "Or maybe you're someone who understands leadership in ways these students need to learn, not from textbooks or case studies, but from having commanded in actual crisis situations where lives depended on your decisions." Before Morgan could respond, she noticed Cassandra Whittington approaching across the quad accompanied by Tyler Brooks and Megan Reynolds. The trio that had once orchestrated her social exclusion now moved with a different purpose, their dynamic visibly altered by the events of the past week. "Captain Riley," Cassandra greeted, formally acknowledging Morgan's uniform and restored military identity. "We heard you're being recalled to active duty." "Temporary assignment," Morgan confirmed. "The investigation is expanding beyond Whittington Defense to examine the entire procurement system." Cassandra nodded, processing this information with the rapid assessment that had always been her strength. "My father's under house arrest, pending trial. The company's board has voted to remove the Whittington name from all corporate branding. 3 generations of family legacy ended in a week." There was no self-pity in her tone, only the clear-eyed evaluation of someone facing reality rather than protecting illusions. "I've been reviewing the company's financial records," Cassandra continued. "Not just Project Achilles, but all our defense contracts going back a decade. The pattern is consistent component substitutions, quality control, circumvention, cost-cutting measures, hidden behind classified designations." "What will you do with that information?" Morgan asked, curious about Cassandra's evolution from defensive heir to potential whistleblower. "Turn it over to your investigation team," she replied without hesitation. "Then use my controlling interest in the company to implement a complete restructuring, new leadership, new quality control protocols, new ethical standards for all contracts, military or civilian." The decisiveness surprised Morgan, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Cassandra had always been confident and determined qualities that could serve either self-interest or greater purpose, depending on the values guiding them. "The Whittington name might be removed from the company," Cassandra added, "but the Whittington responsibility remains. I can't undo what my father did, or bring back the soldiers who died because of his decisions, but I can ensure it never happens again under my watch." Morgan studied her carefully, recognizing the transformation from privileged student to someone accepting the weight of accountability and legacy. It wasn't unlike her own journey from pilot to investigator to reluctant public figure in the expanding reckoning with military procurement corruption. "It won't be easy," Morgan warned. "The system that allowed Project Achilles to exist is entrenched in decades of political influence and financial incentives. Changing it will mean confronting powerful interests that benefit from the status quo." "I'm aware," Cassandra replied with a hint of her old confidence. "Fortunately, I was raised to navigate power structures and institutional influence. The difference is how I choose to use those skills going forward." The symmetry wasn't lost on Morgan Cassandra, repurposing her privileged upbringing toward accountability, just as Morgan had repurposed her military training toward investigation and justice. "There's something else," Tyler interjected, his usual casual demeanor replaced by purposeful focus. "My father's Armed Services Committee is establishing a special investigation into defense contractor practices. He's uncomfortable with my involvement, but I've convinced him that first-hand knowledge of the Whittington situation makes me valuable to the process. And my mother's diplomatic connections are being leveraged to examine international implications," Megan added. "Several NATO allies used Whittington-supplied equipment under joint defense agreements. The potential scope is global rather than just domestic." And what had begun as Morgan's personal quest for justice for her crew had expanded beyond any parameters she could have anticipated. Congressional investigations, international diplomatic inquiries, corporate restructuring, and fundamental reassessment of military procurement systems. The operational landscape had evolved far beyond the initial mission objectives. And standing on that university quad surrounded by unexpected allies who had once been adversaries, Captain Morgan Riley recognized that the most significant phase of her mission was just beginning. "Captain," Samuel Wilson said, checking his watch. Your transport to the Pentagon leaves in 30 minutes. Morgan nodded, then turned to Cassandra Tyler and Megan with a final assessment. What happens next depends on choices, individual decisions that either maintain corrupt systems or challenge them. My crew deserved better than what the system gave them. So did countless other soldiers whose equipment failed when they needed it most. She held each of their gazes in turn. The question isn't what happens to Whittington Defense or Liberty Crest University or Pentagon procurement offices. It's what choices you make going forward now that you know the truth about how they operate. With those words, Captain Morgan Riley turned and walked away, her uniform representing not just her military service, but the integrity and responsibility that transcended institutional affiliation. Behind her, the trio of privileged students watched her departure, not with the dismissive judgment that had once defined their interaction, but with the respectful recognition of genuine leadership tested by fire. Above the campus, the autumn sky stretched clear and limitless, like the horizon of a new mission just beginning. The Valkyrie had returned to flight. As the autumn leaves drifted across Liberty Crest's campus, the story of Captain Morgan Riley faded into legend. The quiet woman in thrift store clothes who commanded respect when everything fell apart. The soldier who spent 4 years seeking justice for fallen brothers, whose names Chen Hayes Ramirez would never be forgotten. Some battles leave no visible scars. The most important wars are often fought not on distant battlefields but in quiet conference rooms, where profit margins are weighed against human lives, where signatures on documents determine whether soldiers return home. In the end, it wasn't about helicopters or hydraulic systems or Pentagon contracts. It was about the sacred trust between those who serve and those who provide the means to serve. About the responsibility that comes with power and the courage required to hold that power accountable. The Whittington Empire crumbled. The university changed. But the greatest transformation came in those who witnessed true leadership, not in credentials or appearance, but in the uncompromising integrity of someone who refused to leave her people behind, even years after the battle ended. Perhaps that's the legacy worth remembering, that one person standing firmly for what's right can send ripples through systems built to resist change. And sometimes those ripples become waves. What battle are you fighting that only you can see?